Chapter 209. So what? Su tilted her head, and her eyes were dark. Wu Lirong seemed to see the burning ghost fire in her deep eyes. That was the flame of anger and hatred that wanted to burn her up. Ha 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 ha, Wu Lirong suddenly laughed maniacally. Little slut, you're very angry, aren't you? I heard that you were very miserable when you were a child. You didn't feel the slightest family affection. You were adopted by a vicious woman and were beaten all day long. Su Li's smile slowly disappeared. She stood up, but she didn't pinch Wu Lirong's fingers again. She let Wu Lirong continue to talk. You were miserable, and so was your father. Back then, I tortured your mother to the end. Even when she died, she didn't say a single word about you. I couldn't calm my hatred, so I cut your mother open and threw away all the things in her body. Later, your father's loyal commander picked up your mother's body bit by bit along the path and put them together. You don't know that your father was crazy. He went crazy on the day he saw your mother's body. If Wu Bin didn't keep persuading him to bury Su Yun, your father would have been a complete lunatic now. Ha 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 ha. I hate you. Why didn't I find that you were the bastard left by Su Yun earlier? Dongfang Rui actually found you. I hate you. Wu Lirong screamed crazily, and her hair was disheveled like a devil. Su Li was expressionless. She stepped away and crushed 5 fingers of Wu Lirong's right foot. The hoarse scream sounded again, accompanied by Su Li's cold and calm voice. Apologize. Apologize for what? Crack. Wu Lirong's left toes were all broken. She was in so much pain that she foamed at the mouth and rolled her eyes. But she could still hear the faint voice clearly. Apologize to my mother, now. Immediately. Bah! Wu Lirong smiled ferociously and spat at Su Li's face. Little bitch, even if you crush all my fingers, I won't say a word of apology. Never in this life. Really? Su Li grabbed Wu Lirong's right hand with one hand and crushed Wu Lirong's whole palm like a chicken claw. More shrill screams echoed in the adytum, but Wu Lirong still did not apologize. Soon, Wu Lirong's limbs were all hanging limply. She lowered her head and panted heavily. She was actually so stubborn that she didn't even say a word of apology. Very good. Su Li wiped the blood on her face and smiled brightly. She said, Mrs. Wu, you really have a good perseverance. However, I like that you can hold on. I haven't had enough fun. Wu Lirong looked up in horror and her pupils contracted. Her limbs were all broken. What else could Su Li do? Then, Wu Lirong saw the most unforgettable scene in her life. Su Li raised her palm, and a burst of dense green light flashed. Then the green light automatically dispersed into 4 groups and flew to her limbs. A strange itch came from her limbs, and her limbs recovered after a few breaths. This also meant that she would have to go through the same torturous method again. Perhaps there would be a 3rd time, a 4th time. As long as she didn't relent, there would be 100 times. At that time, could she still bear it? Wu Lirong's face was pale and her lips were trembling. Are you a human or a ghost? What answered her was the explosion of her right thumb. Aw, 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 aw. The familiar screams came from the adytum again and continued, until the next morning. For a whole night, Fang Yuan stood in front of the adytum and listened to the sound inside the door. He didn't dare to open the door to have a look. He could feel the darkness in Su Li's heart was expanding through the door. If he opened the door at this time, it would definitely not be a good result. In the adytum, Su Li gasped slightly. The wood stars were not endless and she also had a limit. But obviously, Wu Lirong couldn't hold on first. Let me die. Please, Su Li, I was wrong. I want to apologize to your mother. Wu Lirong looked up and begged weakly. After experiencing too many broken limbs, the string in her mind had already broken. Taking a deep breath, Suli stood up with a pious expression on her face. Her voice was still clear and melodious. I will say one sentence and you will say one sentence. I am Wu Lirong. I am Wu Lirong. You killed Su Yun and are unforgivable. You killed Su Yun and are unforgivable. Today, I am willing to die to apologize. Today. Wu Lirong's eyes suddenly changed and she swallowed the second half of the sentence. But Suli stepped on her kneecap and forced her to say it. Say it. If you don't say it, do you want to continue the previous game? Wu Lirong trembled violently and said with difficulty, Today, I am willing to die to apologize. After death, I am willing to go to hell and suffer 16 kinds of torture to apologize for escaping for 16 years. If there is an afterlife, I should be a chicken or a duck in Su Yun's mouth and a cow or a horse. I will be a beast forever. After that, Wu Lirong stopped. But Suli crushed the bones of her right arm with one palm. Read it. Continue to read it. Read it word by word. Ah. I, Wu Lirong, killed Su Yun and are unforgivable. I, Wu Lirong, killed Su Yun and are unforgivable. I, Wu Lirong, killed Su Yun. When Wu Lirong read it for the 7th time, Suli crushed her throat with one hand and finally let her die. The smell of blood was thick in the adytum. Suli took a deep breath and closed her eyes. Mother, did you hear it? Wu Lirong is apologizing to you. She will atone for the sins of thousands of generations. I will make you happy in this life and then go to heaven to accompany you. In the silent stone room, only Suli's echo was like a sigh. Early the next morning, Suli appeared in the sight of Lord Rui's mansion. Lord Rui's mansion didn't want to eat or drink these days. They were so anxious that they almost fell down. As soon as they heard the news of Suli, they immediately rushed over. Where have you been? Seeing that Suli's clothes were clean and tidy and her smile was shallow, Dongfang Rui was relieved. He couldn't help rushing up and hugged her tightly. He suppressed his voice and said, I thought you were like your mother and didn't want me anymore. Suli gently patted Dongfang Rui's back and chuckled, How could it be? Father. I will take good care of you in the future and don't let mother worry. Dongfang Rui's body immediately froze. He heard something. Suli actually called him father. Dongfang Rui suddenly broke away from Suli's arms. He held Suli's shoulders and looked up and down. He was suspicious. Suli couldn't help but laugh. Dongfang Rui had been cheated so many times that he even learned to use his brain. Did he suspect that she was a fake? I am Suli, not someone else. Suli gently pushed away Dongfang Rui's hand and said, Although I admit your identity, I will not become Dongfang Li. My mother didn't marry into the Dongfang family, so I won't. If you can accept it, come to the affiliated school of the National Academy to find me. Then, Suli bypassed Dongfang Rui who was still in a daze. Wu Bin looked at Suli who wanted to take care of both sides. Suli slowly walked away. Before Suli went far, Dongfang Rui woke up. He quickly turned around and chased Suli. Li, wait for your father. There is a carriage. Why do you waste your energy? Suli stopped and looked back with a smile. At that moment, Dongfang Rui's eyes were wet and 2 lines of tears flowed down. His heart was completely melted at this moment. This time, there was no so-called banquet in Lord Rui's mansion. However, Lord Rui went to the National Academy every 2 or 3 days and told everyone he met that Suli had recognized him. He was so proud, like a child showing off his toys everywhere. Wu Bin, who had been following Lord Rui, didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Wu Lirong died. Suli recognized her master. Her master, who had lived a miserable life for 16 years, finally had a good ending. Of course, they didn't know that the real Wu Lirong went to hell with continuous apologies after being tortured by Su Li for a day and a night. Su Yu, who was still busy in the Zhouyue winery, heard the drinkers talking about Su Li's recent situation. She was stunned at first, and then her eyes became soft. She didn't expect that Su Li would forgive Dongfang Rui so easily. Could she also? Seeing his wife's appearance, Xian Jingzhou couldn't help but sigh softly. The knot in his heart had to be untied. But Su Li was not simple. He didn't tell Su Yu about what happened in the Linli building. Su Yu could bear the guilt. So, he would investigate it clearly. On this day, Su Li was studying Wen Tingshan's prescription in the room. It was the first time for her to contact a senior of the longevity realm. While treating his injury, she naturally wanted to test the various functions of the physical body of the longevity realm. Mammy Lee's voice suddenly sounded outside the door. "Miss, Lord comes to see you." "Got it. I'm coming." Su Li put down the prescription and got up to open the door to the front hall of the affiliated school. Mammy Lee followed her happily. She was very happy that Miss was willing to recognize Lord Rui. Only she knew Su Li's suffering in these years. Because she knew it, she knew how difficult it was for Su Li to let go of everything in the past and recognize Lord Rui. In the front hall, Dongfang Rui was looking at the empty school. There were many books on the lesson plan that Su Li thanked personally. He picked up a book and opened it. The handwriting was graceful and beautiful. He really liked it. "Dad, why are you here again? These days, you come here more often than those playboys in the school." Su Li's teasing voice came. Dongfang Rui looked up and couldn't help but laugh loudly. "Why can't I come to see my daughter? If you are willing to live in the Lord Rui's mansion, I don't have to work so hard." Su Li shook her head slightly and said, "The affiliated school is entrusted to me by my master. It also contains the intention of my senior fellow apprentice. Dad, I have made up my mind on this matter. You don't need to persuade me." Dongfang Rui shook his head and sighed bitterly. "You and your mother are the same. I can't persuade you, so I can only bring people to you." "Who are they?" Su Li raised her eyebrows and guessed. "People of the Yunj sect." Dongfang Rui said with a smile, "After today, the Yunj sect will be changed to the Li sect. I originally prepared them for you. Now they are handed over to you." Su Li seemed to feel something and looked out of the door. As expected, she saw acquaintances whom she had fought many times in the previous life approaching slowly. They all knelt down and saluted respectfully. "Miss." There were 5 women and 5 men. They were all in their early 20s and had reached the inborn 3rd hurdle. They were opponents in the previous life and subordinates in this life. How mysterious it was. Su Li glanced at their young faces and narrowed her eyes slightly. "Get up." In the previous life, when she fought with them for the first time, she killed 3 people in a siege of 10 people. She didn't resent these 10 people. The existence of Su Zipei forced them to oppose her, which was also a tragedy. "Dad, you don't have to change the name." Su Li looked back and smiled. "I like the name of the Yunj sect very much." Dongfang Rui smiled and nodded. "The Yunj sect is already yours." "Whatever you say." The 10 people who met their master for the first time felt relieved when they heard this. The Yunj sect was their belief. If it was changed rashly, they would be slightly uncomfortable. It was better that Su Li didn't change the name. It seems that the future master is as kind and easy to get along with as the rumors say. Chapter 210. After handing over the Yunj sect to Su Li, Dongfang Rui seemed to be relieved and smiled more. There were more than 10 people in the Yunj sect. It was a small sect in the martial arts circle with hundreds of people. This time, 1/10 of them came. They were the best elites cultivated by the Yunj sect. They were the pillars of the Yunj sect. The affiliated school was too small for Yunyi and others to live. After meeting Suli, they settled in the nearest yard to the affiliated school and secretly protected Suli. After buying the original residence, Sui asked Su'er and others to clean up the house. Then he came to the back door of the yard. The terrain was quite high. Looking at the affiliated school of the National Academy from the back door, he could see the safety of the affiliated school of the National Academy. If someone wanted to climb over the wall secretly, he couldn't escape their eyes. The head is still young. She only learned medical skills from the miracle-working doctor before. Her cultivation is still shallow. If she takes over the affairs of the martial arts circle, it will be a little shameful. Anyway, the Yunj sect finally has a master. Yunisin let out a deep sigh and her eyes lit up. Just as a country couldn't live without a king, the sect and the martial arts circle would be in a state of disunity if there was no master. It was difficult to survive for a long time. The nature of the Yunj sect was different. It was supported by the Lord Rui's mansion. Yun-Yi was just an orphan wandering around in the early years of war. He was selected by the Yunj sect and got rid of the life of fighting for food with wild dogs. Although the practice and training were very hard, he felt very happy as long as he had enough food and a place to sleep. Later, as he slowly grew up, his outstanding performance allowed his status to continue to rise. His heart also became more and more confused. Ever since he was a child, he had looked forward to having a full meal and warm clothes, but now he was suddenly living the life of his dreams. Furthermore, he had mastered martial arts. The rest of his life suddenly became dull and boring. Finally, one year, Lord Rui came and gave him the name of Yun-Yi. The words of Lord Rui still echoed in his heart. The master of the Yunj sect is not me. It can only be my long-lost daughter. As long as she doesn't show up, the Yunj sect will continue to look for her. Your mission is to guard her for a lifetime and not let her be hurt. If her order is to kill me, you must absolutely obey. Under the brainwashing of Prince Rui, a group of young boys and girls who lacked faith were given the belief that they could fight for their entire lives. He was 12 years old when he entered the Cloud Pavilion, and now he was 26 years old. The faith he had been instilled in him for 14 years had become indestructible. Today, when Yuni saw Suli, who was 10 years younger than him and was so delicate and pretty like a next-door girl, his desire to protect her became stronger. In this life, I will protect my master's safety. Yuni looked at the affiliated school of the National Academy and swore. At this moment, the master that Yuni wanted to protect was not in the affiliated school. Instead, he changed into Mr. Li and appeared in the Linli building. Because a guest came to the Linli building. Suli waved her hand, and the wine glass flew over the space and fell on the table. This time, Ling Qinglan did not dodge in panic, but smiled slightly and nodded to thank her. Lord Ling is very busy, why do you have the time to drink here? Hearing Su Li's gentle words as usual, Ling Qinglan smiled bitterly and said, Mr. Li, you must be joking. This time, I am not looking for you, but our hierarch. I come here to send an invitation. Child Li. Su Li smiled lightly and said, your child is not an idle person. This time, he suddenly invited me. Ling Qinglan's eyes flashed. He held his fists and said, Mr. Li, you are my savior. I should not hide something from you, so I will be frank. On that rainy night in the Wu family, did you do something behind the scenes? Su Li raised her eyebrows and slowly held the wine glass in her hand. Why do you think it was me? Ling Qinglan shook his head and smiled. Hierarch thinks that only you can weaken 80% of the outside forces in the capital secretly without doing anything to us. On that day, the Yinma cult also took action. But before they played a role, everything was over. Su Li's action took the initiative, so that the Yinma cult could not do anything this time. Su Li narrowed her eyes slightly. So, Ling Li prepared to thank her, so he held a banquet. She faintly felt that there was another purpose in this matter. Ling Li's temper could not be so simple. However, she now had Wen Tingshan by her side. She was not afraid of being exposed as Mr. Li. She still had to go to this banquet. Thinking of this, Su Li cupped her hands and smiled lightly. Since Hierarch invites me, how can I not go? Ling Qinglan smiled and took out the invitation and put it on the side of the table. Then, I will wait for Mr. Li. Then, Ling Qinglan was about to leave. His only purpose this time was to invite Ms. Li. The reason why he came to send the invitation in person was to show that he attached importance to Ms. Li. If he sent a random person to send the invitation, he was afraid that Ms. Li would be annoyed. By the way, Lord Ling, please wait. Su Li took the invitation and suddenly remembered something. She stopped Ling Qinglan. Ling Qinglan turned his head in confusion and saw Su Li squinting her eyes. She asked softly, I heard that Lord Ling has been investigating the unsolved case of the Yi family, right? Ling Qinglan was slightly shocked. After hesitating for a moment, he nodded gently and said, I have some connections with the Yi family. Although he didn't say, EMO, he knew that Mr. Li was smart and could definitely guess something. Mr. Li already knew many of his secrets, so it didn't make any difference. Moreover, his investigation was not a secret. Although he had many unsolved cases to cover up the real purpose of investigating the unsolved case of the Yi family, it was easy for people like Su Li to see the difference. Seeing that Ling Qinglan told her frankly, Su Li smiled slightly. I was going to tell you about it a few days ago, but a lot of things happened, so I put it off. Since you are here today, I will tell you. Su Li crooked her fingers, and a scroll automatically flew out from the bookshelf behind her and fell into Ling Qinglan's hands. Ling Qinglan lowered his head and stroked the scented scroll with his fingers. His heart was beating wildly. Had Mr. Li found out who the real murderer of the Yi family was? It was impossible. He didn't get the result for so many years. No matter how powerful Mr. Li was, he was only born 14 years ago. How could he know too much? He forced himself to calm down, opened the file, and read it. His face immediately became incomparably cold and solemn. What was written on the scroll was exactly what Chen Gong said to Xian Jingzhou when he came over. He knew nothing about all kinds of strange things at that time. Sure enough, it was blocked. A cold light flashed in Ling Qinglan's eyes. His relationship with Chen Gong was not close before, and there was a grudge left by the vicious competition between the Supreme Judiciary and the Ministry of Penalty. But this time, even if Chen Gong didn't like him, he would visit him in person. Ling Qinglan, there was something strange about the matter at that time. Someone deliberately didn't allow you to unite with Chen Gong. If you want to take action, you should be careful. Don't lose your calm. Su Li's cold voice suddenly sounded. Ling Qinglan came to his sense. He stood up and bowed respectfully. I understand. Mr. Li, you helped me so much, and I can't repay you. If one day I can find the real murderer and kill the enemy, I will definitely come to have a drink and talk with you. It's a deal. Goodbye. Ling Qinglan cupped his hands and turned around. When he was about to leave, Wen Tingshan came into the room from outside. This person was so strange, Ling Qinglan was confused. He and Ling Li still knew nothing about the origin of the Linli building. The Yinma cult only found another Linli building in the Qinghe town after several investigations. No one knew where the seniors of the Linli building came from and how many arrangements there were. Everyone seemed to appear out of thin air and didn't exist in this world. But everyone who appeared so far could be called a genius, because they were not only young but also practiced incredibly fast. Now, Ling Qinglan suddenly saw an old man of the Linli building. He was naturally curious, and then he looked at him a few more times, when Tingshan frowned slightly and turned to see Ling Qinglan's face. This was Ling Qinglan of the Supreme Judiciary, the lackey of the Dongfang family. Chapter 211. Protector Shan, he is not an enemy. Hearing Su Li's voice, Wen Tingshan withdrew his momentum and looked slightly stiff. He showed an apologetic expression and said with a fist and palm salute, "I'm sorry. I'm not used to being stared at." Ling Qinglan quickly returned the salute and said, never mind. It's my fault." But in his heart, he was aghast. This person's imposing aura was really terrifying. His cultivation had already reached the 5th level of the congenital realm after he had recovered from his serious injuries. But under the oppression of this person, he actually felt a deep despair, as if as long as this person attacked, he would absolutely be unable to survive. He had never felt this kind of feeling from Lingli. Lingli was already at the peak of the inborn realm, then this person, Ling Qinglan's pupils shrank slightly. Longevity realm. The background of the Linli building was more terrible than he had imagined. After Ling Qinglan left, Su Li smiled helplessly. This scene was not arranged by her. It was purely a coincidence. She was not going to accept the gratitude of the Yinmo cult. She would not gain anything if she rashly shocked Ling Qinglan. "Protector Shan, why are you here?" When Ting Shan was still confused about Ling Qinglan's identity, he couldn't help but say, "Is he Ling Qinglan, the officer of the Supreme Judiciary?" Su Li nodded gently, and when Ting Shan's face immediately became gloomy, the Dongfang family is not easy to deal with. They had a relationship with the Wangjian sect in the early years. "If they recognize me, I'm afraid." Su Li's expression changed slightly. It was the first time for her to hear that the Han dynasty was related to the Wangjian sect. If when Ting Shan didn't mention it today, she would suffer a lot in the future. Could it be that my husband failed in my previous life because of the 10,000 Swords Pavilion? Su Li's expression became a little uncertain, which immediately made Wen Tingshan misunderstand. His eyes flashed with killing intent, and he suggested aloud, "Why don't I catch up with her now, in case of accidents?" Su Li came back to her senses and explained, "Don't worry. Even if he recognizes you, he won't tell others. If Ling Qinglan is in the Supreme Judiciary, it will not belong to the Dongfang family." Wen Tingshan was stunned. After thinking about it, he finally understood what Su Li meant. It turned out that Ling Qinglan was not loyal to the Dongfang family. "By the way, you still haven't told me why you're here today. According to my arrangements, you should still be resting in bed right now." "What, you can't bear it anymore?" When Tingshan looked ashamed, "I'm afraid that the medicine you gave me these days will be wasted." Su Li raised her eyebrows and realized that when Tingshan was implying something. She suddenly said, "Are you going to the Qinghe girls' school?" When Tingshan nodded silently, Su Li shook her head with disappointment in her eyes. "I understand your feelings very well. You can't wait to stand in front of Ning Qing in the next moment and tell him everything that has happened over the years. But have you ever thought about where the people of the 10,000 Swords Pavilion are now?" When Tingshan's expression changed slightly, he frowned and said, "After I returned to the sect, I didn't suggest Qing. I even set up a camouflage near Tianji country. They should still be wandering there. But it won't be long before they find Han country. If the Dongfang family joins hands with them, then, that's why you can't look for her now." Su Li interrupted Wen Tingshan and said coldly, "It's a long way to the Qinghe province. Even if you don't stop for a moment, it will take at least 7 days. In addition, you are seriously injured, and your fighting power is almost zero. If you meet the people of the 10,000 Swords Pavilion at that time, do you think they can protect Ningqing? What Su Li said flashed in Wen Tingshan's mind. The anxiety on his face changed for a few seconds, and finally turned into helplessness and bitterness. You are right. I can't go to her now, or I will only put her in danger and hurt her in vain. But he really missed her so much that his reason was almost beyond his control. His whole body was almost out of control. Bear it. Su Li was expressionless and said lightly, Ningqing has been waiting for so many years. She doesn't care about waiting for 2 more months. If you go like this, you will be separated from her forever. It's better not to go. Wen Tingshan took a deep breath. Whenever he thought of the words, 10,000 Swords Pavilion, his heart seemed to be pressed by a huge mountain. He said, how will you deal with the people of the 10,000 Swords Pavilion? It depends on how much you know about the pursuers. Su Li smiled at this moment and said, take good care of yourself. Otherwise, you can't even deal with a pursuer. Yes. Wen Tingshan's eyes were firm. Finally, he completely obeyed Su Li. As time went by, it was the day when Su Li kept the appointment. From the east gate of Yunjing City, after walking for dozens of miles, you could see a lake with a very wide view. Because it looked like a bow, it was named Sky Bow Lake. It was very cold on the lake in winter. It was really unwise to go boating on the lake. But at this moment, there was indeed a ship with several decks drifting gently on the lake. In the warm room of the ship, Su Li and Ling Li, who wore a jade bone mask, were sitting face to face. There was a small tea table in the middle. Ling Yimo stood straight outside the warm room and let the cold wind blow his face. Around the ship, there were people of Shalu cult. After a cup of tea, Ling Li lifted the teapot and added a cup of tea for Su Li. His clear and melodious laughter sounded on the lake. Mr. Li, you are really brave. You come to drink tea with me alone. Aren't you afraid that I won't have a good feast? Su Li smiled slightly and replied lightly, since I am here, I will take it easy. Child Ling Li, why don't you take off your mask and tell me why you call me out this time? Ling Li chuckled and gently took off his mask. His face was as young as Su Li's. He looked calm, but his heart was not as calm as it seemed. He wore a mask because his disguise skill had not reached the peak. Warriors of the inborn realm could still see the clues. But this person couldn't even see whether he disguised himself or not. Did he really show his true face? What are you thinking about, Hierarch? Su Li took a sip of tea, but she was confused. She could see from the subtle changes in his expression that Ling Li seemed to have a trace of hostility to her identity. Where did this hostility come from? Ling Li was revealed to be absent-minded. He disguised a smile and shook his head, nothing. Today, I invite Mr. Li to come here to thank you for helping Qinghu cure the Lijue pill. I also have a question. Ling Li didn't ask about the rainy night in the Wu family. He got the answer from Ling Qinglan. It would be troublesome to ask again. Su Li secretly thought that as expected. She put down the cup and nodded, I'd like to hear the details. Ling Li slightly pursed his lips, and there was a hint of tension in his starry eyes at this moment. He asked, what is the relationship between you and Su Li? Su Li's expression was slightly stagnant. What was this? Her identity was seen through so quickly. No. Not yet. Su Li suddenly realized what Ling Li's hostility was. Her mind immediately became complicated. Seeing that Su Li was silent, Ling Li's heart sank slightly, but he remained calm on the surface. He continued to ask, why are you hesitating? This question shouldn't be too difficult. You are definitely not the relationship I imagined, right? Ling Li's palms between his knees slowly clenched into fists. When his patience was about to run out again, Su Li finally raised her head and smiled carelessly. what is the relationship between me and Su Li? What does it have to do with Child Ling? Ling Li was tense for a moment, and then he forced himself to relax and continued to respond, nothing else. I was saved by Miss Su in those years, and I dare not forget her kindness. You and Su Li are from the same hometown, but why didn't she mention it when I was recuperating in Miss Su's place? I feel strange, so I asked this question. Su Li's smile faded a little. At that time, the Linley building had not been built yet, and there was no Mr. Li. But obviously, she couldn't explain it to Ling Li. She mentioned you to me, but since she didn't mention me in front of you, she must think that saving you is just a trivial thing, just like saving a cat or dog on the street. It is not worth mentioning, and she will not meet you in the future. Hearing the faint words, Ling Li's eyes immediately became slightly cold. Mr. Li. Are you provoking me? The atmosphere in the pavilion instantly became hostile, as if there was a snowstorm blowing, and the warmth was gone. Chapter 212. Ling Li emitted a frightening momentum. His sharp face was full of coldness. He looked at Su Li quietly as if he was looking at a dead person. Now, he was very angry. Although he didn't understand why, it didn't prevent him from fighting against Mr. Li in front of him. There was a voice in his heart that if Mr. Li didn't fight against him, he might have one less obstacle. Ling Imo stood in the wind and snow and noticed the atmosphere in the warm room. A trace of worry flashed in his cold eyes. No matter what Master did, he would support him unconditionally. But if Master really fought against Mr. Li, the consequences. Time passed by for a few breaths, but it seemed that several centuries had passed. As Ling Li took a deep breath and sat down again, the atmosphere in the room returned to ease. He finally gave up the impulse in his heart. With more burdens, he had to consider more. He was no longer the mercenary who always acted alone and had unparalleled spirit before the time travel. He was Ling Li who controlled the future of the Ling family and the fate of the Yinmo cult. Su Li closed the half-open jade bottle between her knees and sighed in her heart. It was the best not to fight against them. The Linley building absolutely supported the Yinmo cult, but it couldn't be a part of it. She had to keep this in any case. If her identity was exposed, everything she had done would be in vain. Sorry, Ling Li, Su Li smiled slightly and apologized. My analogy may be inappropriate. If it annoys you, I apologize in advance. Ling Li was slightly shocked. Why did this person's attitude suddenly become less hostile? Sect Master Ling invited me here because you're afraid that my winery will affect your sect. Please don't worry about this, Sect Master. As Miss Su Li said, since I took her recipe, I will manage it well and let people in the world drink good wine. The Linley building has no ambition and will not get involved in the Dahan country. I will make it clear here. Please rest assured, Hierarch Ling. Then, Su Li smiled and drank up the cold wine in the cup in one gulp, without any hesitation. But this explanation made Linley more doubtful. Since the Linley building had no other demand, why did it take action? All the people in the world came for benefits, and all the people in the world went away for benefits. What did Mr. Li want? After that, the two had nothing to say and kept quiet. They drank a cup of wine and had their own thoughts. When the time came, the banquet finally ended on a bad note. Su Li thanked him. She tiptoed on the surface of the lake and floated away, leaving Ling Li who was full of worries. After he came to this world, with the modern knowledge he brought, he built up a strong and mysterious force like steel in less than 10 years. He thought that there were not many things in the world that could baffle him. But since Su Li appeared, there were more and more things he didn't understand. Master, it's late. Let's go back first, or we will be found by Madam. Ling Xian came out from the back of the ship and whispered to Ling Li. Ling Li responded and glanced at Ling Mo without a trace. Ling Mo was expressionless and had no reaction. Ling Mo was expressionless and didn't respond. Ling Mo didn't dare to say it in front of Ling Xian, which meant that Ling Xian had done other unspeakable things in addition to the affairs of the cult. After thinking for a moment, Ling Li ordered to go back. He didn't ask Ling Xian whether he should wait for her to confess or wait for him to find out everything and then ask. He needed to think about it carefully. At this moment, a rather strange scene appeared in the Linli building. In the middle of the underground adytum, Xian Jingzhou was tied up tightly and looked depressed. Fang Yuan, Chu Qingming, Yin Xuedong and Fang Mu stood in the room and looked at each other. Then they turned their eyes to Wen Tingshan at the same time. Wen Tingshan was puzzled and said in a deep voice, "Why are you looking at me?" Chu Qingming touched his panda eyes and pushed Wen Tingshan out of the door. "Come on, Protector Shan. Let's go out and talk." Wen Tingshan was pushed out of the adytum helplessly, and the other 4 people also came out. Except for Fang Yuan, the others all laughed, which made Wen Tingshan more depressed. He argued, this person spies on the Linli building for no reason. He must have bad intentions. I caught him and left him for Su Li to interrogate. What's wrong? 2 hours ago, Xian Jingzhou had been secretly inquiring about the news since he saw Su Li come into the Linli building that night. But no matter which intelligence force, they knew nothing about the relationship between the Linli building and Su Li. Some people even thought that he was unreasonable and drove him out. In desperation, Xian Jingzhou could only sneak into the Linli building alone to explore. Unfortunately, he happened to enter the room used by Wen Tingshan for healing. Wen Tingshan's spiritual mind was so sharp that he noticed it the moment Xian Jingzhou appeared. Poor Xian Jingzhou was in the inborn 8th hurdle. Under Wen Tingshan's surprise attack, Xian Jingzhou was knocked unconscious and fell to the ground. Then there was the scene in the adytum. The 4 people who knew the relationship between Xian Jingzhou and Su Li felt strange. Now, even if Su Li didn't want to contact Xian Jingzhou and Su Yu for the time being, she couldn't. Half an hour later, the sky was already pitch black. Su Li came to the Linli building. After listening to Wen Tingshan's narration, she suddenly fell into silence. After a long time, she changed into a cyan robe and changed into the appearance of Mr. Li. Then she came to the underground adytum. Squeak, the low and hoarse sound of the door opening was extremely harsh in Xian Jingzhou's ears. He suddenly raised his head, and his eyes lit up. When he saw Su Li's strange face, he was stunned. This was a face that he had never seen before. He hesitated and said a word, "You, Mr. Li." Su Li was expressionless and looked at him. At this moment, Xian Jingzhou was no longer a pedantic scholar with the atmosphere of a marketplace. Instead, he exuded the great righteousness of a decent person who practiced the authentic mental method of Xiangong. This was the real Xian Jingzhou. "Are you Mr. Li?" Xian Jingzhou couldn't help but exclaim. Nowadays, there were many mysterious rumors about Mr. Li in major intelligence forces. Although he was not as famous as the equally mysterious and powerful child Li, the name Mr. Li was also well known in Yunjing City. The reason why the name was famous was not that what the Wu family did on a rainy night was known. Otherwise, the Linli building would have been destroyed more than 18 times. What really made Mr. Li revered was his unpredictable medical skills. The elixir that Ling Qinglan took was the frightening Li Jue pill. But after such a long time, he was still alive and kicking. How could it not make people of the Lianshi cult shocked? The Li Jue pill was related to the foundation of the Lianshi cult. After many investigations, they finally found the name of Mr. Li, but they still didn't know which force he belonged to, what he looked like, and whether he was a man or a woman. It was a family scandal for the Lianshi cult, and it couldn't be spread out. However, there were a few spies in every sect, so the reputation of Mr. Li spread out. It became more and more exaggerated with the word of mouth of people in the martial arts circle. Some people even said that Mr. Li was an old monster who had lived for hundreds of years. He was obsessed with medical skills, so he could cure the Li Jua pill. No one in the world could compare with him. Even Qi Xianqing was not as good as him. Under the influence of such rumors, Xian Jingzhou suddenly saw that Mr. Li was a teenager. How could he not exclaim? It turns out that you are the owner of the Linli building. I should have thought of it. Xian Jingzhou calmed down and shook his head. He smiled bitterly and said, according to the rules of the martial arts circle, I admit defeat if I am not as good as others. It's up to you to punish me. Su Li smiled indifferently and said, Xian Jingzhou, to tell you the truth, I have been paying attention to you and your wife. Su Li's first sentence made Xian Jingzhou's bitter smile become cold. What do you want to do? Do you remember the pot of wine that you and your wife drank on the first day of the opening of the Linli building? Xian Jingzhou's expression was tense, and he felt that something was wrong. What happened to the pot of wine? Su Li chuckled and said, Don't worry. The pot of wine is not poisoned. Otherwise, how can you and your wife be fine after so many days? But for you who are on the path of practicing the mortal world, whether it is poisoned or not, is there any difference? When Su Li said the last sentence, Xian Jingzhou's face finally changed. This person knew everything. Chapter 213. Su Li paced and said with a light smile, People of the secular world can't be disturbed on the way to practice mind. A drop of water should be repaid with a spring. So, I exchanged the 2 pots of wine for your loyalty to the Linli building. Is it too much? Xian Jingzhou was livid and growled, Despicable. You are not a gentleman to do this. Despicable. Su Li raised her eyebrows and said, When did I say that I am a gentleman? Besides, what I did was an overt scheme at most. You drank the 2 pots of wine willingly. I didn't force you. How is it despicable? You. Xian Jingzhou was angry for a while. Su Li clapped her hands. Fang Yuan, who was guarding outside the door, immediately opened the door and said, Go and invite Su Yu. Tell her that Xian Jingzhou is a guest here and can't afford to pay for the wine. Fang Yuan glanced at Xian Jingzhou, who was anxious and angry. He nodded and left. Stupid woman, don't come. Xian Jingzhou's heart seemed to be pressed by a stone, which was very heavy. They were schemed against and forced to join a force. They were not willing to be controlled by others. But now he was here. According to Su Yu's character, she had to come. Sure enough, not long after Fang Yuan went out, Su Yu went into the Linli building with a kitchen knife. When she saw that the wine tables in the lobby of the Linli building were as neat as a mirror, and when she saw Fang Yuan standing at the entrance of the underground adytum and guiding her to go down, she finally realized that something was wrong. Su Yu's boorish face could not hide her exquisite thoughts. Her thick eyebrows twitched as she asked, Little brother, what exactly did my master do? Just tell me, I'm listening. Fang Yuan looked as gentle as possible and whispered, Proprietress, you will know when you go down. My master is waiting for you downstairs. Su Yu looked slightly serious. She hesitated for a moment and finally followed Fang Yuan down the stairs. There was an underground adytum in the Linli building. The secret of the Zhouyue winery. Su Yu quietly turned the kitchen knife in her hand and pointed it at Fang Yuan, who showed his back to her. But at this moment, Fang Yuan stopped and turned his head and smiled, Proprietress, this way please. Su Yu was not embarrassed at all. She naturally put away the kitchen knife and pushed the door pointed by Fang Yuan. Creak, Su Yu slowly opened the door. As soon as she saw the scene in the room, she immediately moved from stillness to extreme. Without saying a word, she lifted the kitchen knife and flashed to stab Su Li's neck. Fong Yuan's complexion changed greatly, but it was too late to stop it. Su Li's pupils shrank in an instant, and her body seemed to turn into a boneless snake. She avoided Su Yu's fatal blow, but she also retreated from Xian Jingzhou. Su Yu was happy when she saw this. She didn't want to kill Xian Jingzhou. After she forced Su Li to retreat, she immediately cut the rope that bound Xian Jingzhou. Success. Lady Boss is really an impatient person. If there's anything, why don't we sit down and talk? Why do we have to resort to violence? Su Li chuckled, without any sense of exasperation. Su Yu's heart skipped a beat. She finally knew why Su Li was so calm. It was because even if the rope was loosened, Xian Jingzhou was still motionless. Jingzhou. Su Yu was confused. Xian Jingzhou patted the rope on his body and stood up with a wry smile. We have been tricked. Su Yu's face changed slightly. She had long felt that something was wrong. Was it intentional that the Linley building invited them to drink last time? Su Li patted the cyan robe that was cut by the wind of the knife. She laughed at the right time and said, "Why do you make such a bitter face? If you join the Linley building, there will only be benefits and no harm." Su Yu snorted and put the kitchen knife in her waist pocket. She said, "Those in power like sweet words most. Do you think that I will believe whatever you say? If you are sensible, let us go. The money for the 2 pots of wine. Give us time, and we will pay it back 100 times. Xian Jingzhou sighed at the moment. He could see the situation better than Su Yu. This person had planned for a long time, and he came to the Linley building. How could he let them go easily? "Mr. Li, I just want to ask, what is the relationship between Su Li and you, and the Linley building?" As soon as Xian Jingzhou said this, Su Yu's cold face immediately turned into astonishment. This young man was Mr. Li. Su Li actually had a relationship with the Linley building. Su Li raised her eyebrows and asked in a deep voice, "Where did you know the relationship between Su Li and me?" Su Li's answer was equivalent to a disguised acquiescence of the relationship. Xian Jingzhou breathed a sigh of relief and accepted his fate. He said, "A few days ago at night, I saw you and a beggar entering this restaurant, so... Otherwise, how could I easily take risks when I knew that the Linley building was weird?" Su Yu listened and became more silent. She was angry in her heart. Xian Jingzhou had been hiding these words from her. I see, the scene of that day flashed in Su Li's mind. On that day, when Tingshan suddenly attacked her. Her state of mind was indeed a little chaotic. She didn't find that someone was spying on her. Fortunately, it was only Xian Jingzhou and his wife who knew it. If it was someone else, Su Li narrowed her eyes and said, "Su Li and I do have some relationship, including the wine of the Linley building. Half of the industry income of the Linley building belongs to her." That was, friends. The thought flashed in Su Yu's mind. Her resistance to the Linley building was not so serious, but she still had doubts in her heart and did not dare to join rashly. "After joining the Linley building, I will not interfere with your life. If it is not necessary, you are still the proprietress of the Zhouyue winery. Only when it is necessary, I will ask you to help. There is no danger to your life. And you can enjoy the wine of the Linley building. It doesn't charge you." Su Li smiled slightly and added another bargaining chip. Xian Jingzhou was so tempted that he almost agreed. Fortunately, Su Yu stopped him in time. At this moment, another person pushed the door and came in without saying hello. Su Li looked back helplessly. She knew it was Wen Tingshan. This person was obviously used to be free in the Wanjian sect. He didn't respect her, the temporary leader, at all. Mr. Li, Wen Tingshan almost spilled the beans and broke into a cold sweat. At this time, he just heard the reason from Chu Qingning and felt a little guilty. After all, Xian Jingzhou was Su Li's uncle, and he didn't show any mercy at that time. Why are you here? Go back and lie down. Do you really think my medicine doesn't cost money? Su Li scolded him coldly. Wen Tingshan smiled apologetically and stepped back. I'll go back now. This was the second time that he acted without authorization. It was normal for Su Li to be angry. Su Yu stared at Wen Tingshan's face and blinked, as if she saw something incredible. Just as Wen Tingshan was about to step out, she asked in surprise, "Senior fellow apprentice." Wen Tingshan trembled violently and looked back incredulously. When he saw Su Yu's face, he frowned and was vigilant. "Who are you?" Then he winked at Su Li, indicating that she shouldn't let this woman go. If his identity was known, the Linli building would be in big trouble. Su Li didn't move, but raised her eyebrows slightly. Her aunt seemed to know Wen Tingshan. What was going on? You are really senior fellow apprentice Wen. Su Yu saw Wen Tingshan's familiar frown. Even though it had been 8 years, she still recognized him at a glance. He was undoubtedly the first senior fellow apprentice. She immediately changed her fat face and revealed a beautiful face that was somewhat similar to Su Yun's. Senior fellow apprentice, I am Su Yu. Junior sister apprentice Su Yu. Wen Tingshan's voice immediately rose. He turned back a few steps and grabbed Su Yu's shoulder. He said excitedly, "You are still alive. I always thought you had died outside. Fortunately. Senior fellow apprentice, it's so nice to see you." Su Yu cried with joy. She completely ignored Xian Jingzhou's strange gaze and threw herself into Wen Tingshan's arms. The appearance of Wen Tingshan immediately eased the relationship between Su Yu and her husband and the Linli building. In addition, Su Yu joined the Linli building without asking Xian Jingzhou's opinion. Obviously, Su Yu trusted Wen Tingshan very much. Since Wen Tingshan was willing to join the force, there would be no problem. But she didn't know that Wen Tingshan was also driven into a corner by Su Li's bewitching potion and was quickly pulled into the group. Su Li rubbed her eyebrows. Su Yu was also a member of the Wanjian sect. The reason seemed to be traced back to a long time ago. Chapter 214. What happened next was much simpler. Under Su Li's deterrence, Wen Tingshan lay back obediently. Su Yu obviously had a lot of words to say to him. After sending Xian Jingzhou away to drink alone, she ran into Wen Tingshan's room. Su Li didn't listen to the secrets of the Wanjian sect. She didn't have so much time to waste here. If she left for a long time, the affiliated school might have problems. Since she and Wen Tingshan decided to join hands to deal with the Wanjian sect, Wen Tingshan would tell her frankly when she came back. After Su Li left, Xian Jingzhou drank several jars of Liehua spirits excitedly and fell asleep. The whole Linli building was quiet. Only Wen Tingshan's room was still bright. Senior fellow apprentice, why did you go down the mountain? Have the rules of the sect been changed in these years? Su Yu asked cautiously. She also went down the mountain without permission, and she went down the mountain more than 10 years earlier than Wen Tingshan. If Wen Tingshan hadn't changed his appearance for a long time and was the closest senior fellow apprentice in her heart, she wouldn't have recognized him rashly and caused the Wanjian sect to continue to chase after her. Wen Tingshan shook his head. Are you still worried about the law enforcers of the Wanjian sect? Don't worry, because, Su Yu was slightly happy, but Wen Tingshan smiled bitterly, the person they are chasing now is me. What? Su Yu stood up in shock and asked repeatedly, Senior fellow apprentice, you are the first senior fellow apprentice of the Wanjian sect and the future head of the Wanjian sect. Why are you like this, and you are so seriously injured? What happened? Wen Tingshan's eyes were slightly gloomy. Since the token of the head of the Wanjian sect was lost, the Wanjian sect hasn't had it for decades. When you left, the Wanjian sect was in chaos. Su Yu was silent when she heard the words. She thought of various things in the Wanjian sect. The former head of the Wanjian sect died outside. Although Wen Tingshan was the first disciple and entered the longevity realm, he was stopped by the first elder and others many times because he didn't have the token of the head of the Wanjian sect. That was what she saw before she left the sect. Later, the Wanjian sect went down the mountain to visit relatives every year. She came to Yunjing City to experience the disaster. She was seriously injured and missed the time to go back. She was regarded as a traitor who left the sect and could not go back. The great elder doesn't have much lifespan left. He's very anxious for his son to become the successor of the 10,000 Swords Pavilion. Wen Tingshan's eyes seemed to be blowing over the cold snow. He said, I thought that he would repent, but he sent away the second elder and the third elder, and united with other elders who supported him to attack me. Speaking of this, Wen Tingshan stroked Su Yu's forehead and smiled as gently as before, don't worry. It won't be chaotic for too long. When the second elder and others come back, it will be settled. Before that, as long as I can solve the pursuers, everything can be solved. Mr. Li's medical skills are superb. My injury will recover in less than half a month. That's good. Su Yu heaved a sigh of relief. Then, she seemed to have thought of something and suddenly took out an item. She smiled and said, Senior brother, look, what is this? There was a small cyan sword in Su Yu's hand. It was not made of jade or bronze. Wen Tingshan's pupils shrank when he saw it. He picked up the small sword in Su Yu's hand and looked at it carefully. The small sword was only the size of a thumb, but it was much heavier than an ordinary long sword. Wen Tingshan held his breath and exerted his strength on the small sword. In an instant, a black light that was darker than the night flashed from the sword. The stars were twinkling, like an endless starry sky. Wen Tingshan was excited. Yes, it is the token of the head of the Wanjian sect made of cyan stone. Why do you have it? Su Yu smiled embarrassedly and her cheeks were slightly red. After I was seriously injured, my husband saved me. Later, I found that he also learned the swordsmanship of the Wanjian sect. Later, he took out this token, and I knew that he was the descendant of the head of the Wanjian sect. Jingzhou never wanted to be the head of the Wanjian sect, so he gave it to me. I also thought about going back to the Wanjian sect to give it to my senior fellow apprentice. But the road ahead was dangerous and I had something on my mind. Finally, it was delayed. So, Xian Jingzhou is the junior fellow apprentice. Wen Tingshan smiled. The last head of the Wanjian sect was surnamed Xian. It was so long ago that he almost forgot it. Senior fellow apprentice, Xian Jingzhou is a little reckless, but he is kind and reliable. He is worthy of a lifetime. Su Yu was 40 years old, but she looked only about 20 years old with the support of the inborn realm. Her face was red and beautiful. She said, Senior fellow apprentice, so many years have passed. Is it time to find a sister-in-law? It was true that she had some admiration for Wen Tingshan at that time. But with the great changes and several twists and turns, the memories of the early years in the Wanjian sect had become the beautiful memories of youth. Eldest senior fellow apprentice had entered the longevity realm. Although he looked only in his early 30s, he was actually 50 years old. If he was alone, it would be too pitiful. Wen Tingshan put away the token, narrowed his eyes, and smiled more softly. He said softly, You have a sister-in-law. When I recover, I will bring her to see you. That's great. Senior fellow apprentice also found someone he likes, the sky was about to turn bright. They hadn't seen each other for more than 10 years and talked all night. Many knots in their hearts were untied and they were suddenly enlightened. After dawn, Suli woke up from meditation and practiced all night. With the support of the medicinal materials of the Lord Rui's mansion, she refined many new auxiliary medicines. But now her cultivation was extremely close to the peak of the previous life. There were not many effective auxiliary medicines. Most of the prescriptions needed living people as the guiding drug, which was against the harmony of heaven and earth. So, she abandoned them in this life. The longevity realm, Suli's curly eyelashes trembled slightly after the genuine energy went through a big circle. She opened a pair of starry eyes, which were full of brilliance. That was the realm that she didn't really step into in the previous life. It was said that only in the spiritual circle could she have the opportunity to step into the longevity realm. The martial arts circle and the secular world lacked the necessary factors. No matter how outstanding her talent was, it was impossible to break the barrier. If she reached the limit of the inborn realm again, she could go to the Wanjian sect with the help of Wenting Shan. Suli opened the door of the adytum and walked out. This thought lingered in her mind for a long time. After all, this world was a world of strength. It was said that there was a higher realm above the longevity realm. Those people were called immortals. Some of them were even powerful enough to destroy a country alone. They could fill the sea and build mountains at will. They could turn the world upside down. In such a deformed world, if she was strong enough, there was no need to build any force. She could help Lingli destroy his enemies and even his country alone. In the face of absolute strength, all schemes and plots were useless. Unfortunately, she didn't have absolute strength. She was even on the weaker side. Therefore, she could only rely on her little tricks and seek unorthodox ways to win with difficulty. "Miss, Butler Wu is here." After washing, Mammy Lee came in and whispered. Suli put down the towel. "People of the Yunj sect were sent here a few days ago. Why did Wu Bin come here today?" Suli was puzzled. She changed into her usual gauze skirt and came to the front room. When Wu Bin saw Suli, he immediately bowed and saluted. "Miss, greetings to you." Suli dodged and asked, "Butler Wu, get up quickly. Why do you come here today?" Wu Bin didn't notice Suli's little movement. He raised his head and looked complicated. He said slowly, "Miss, today is the day of Zhu Yan's exile. Master asked me to ask you if you want to see it." Suli raised her eyebrows. Time flew so fast. Zhu Yan and Su Zipei joined hands to deceive the Lord. This was an absolute felony. The Supreme Judiciary convicted Zhu Yan according to the laws of the Han dynasty. Zhu Yan was the mastermind. She would be sent to the frontier to build a city tower. She would either die of exhaustion or be crushed to death mercilessly in the war. Su Zipei believed Zhu Yan's slander and was greedy. She wanted to get involved in the royal power. She should have been sent to the frontier with Zhu Yan. Because of her young age, her punishment was reduced. So, she was demoted to a slave and became a slave forever. Suli still remembered that Su Zipei's dream was to be a high and mighty miss of a rich and powerful family. Now, after several years of efforts, the result was the opposite. It was so ironic. Chapter 2:15. Under the protection of Wu Bin, Suli came to the Zhongtan Street in Yunjing City. At this moment, the line of prisoners exiled from the prison of the Supreme Judiciary was very long. Both sides of the street were surrounded by people who came to watch. When Wu Bin and others arrived, they were dressed in luxurious clothes. People immediately made way for them. Such a movement attracted the attention of many prisoners. Among them, there was Zhu Yan, who still had a trace of fantasy. She didn't believe that Su Li, who always cared about her and indulged her, would not take any remedial measures this time. As long as she was willing to ask, Lord Rui would definitely agree to set her free. When she turned her head and saw Wu Bin's pale face, she subconsciously showed fear. But then she saw Su Li beside Wu Bin. Her face instantly changed into ecstasy. Then she rushed over without hesitation and shouted desperately, "Li! Li! My daughter is my mother. Hurry up and save mother." The royal guards who were responsible for guarding immediately stopped Zhu Yan, who seemed to be crazy. Zhu Yan was no match for the royal guards. Soon she was pressed to the ground by a group of royal guards. But her limbs were still struggling desperately, and she kept shouting, "Li! Has your conscience been eaten by dogs? Come and save me. I'm about to be crushed to death. Someone is dead. Someone is dead." Such a big movement even attracted the attention of the people around. Su Li naturally noticed it. In fact, she found Zhu Yan from the beginning and witnessed the whole process. But she pretended not to find it. "Butler, go and have a look," Su Li ordered. Wu Bin looked at Wu Bin's expression worriedly. But he still walked over with people. Hu Daiden, the leader of the royal guards, saw Wu Bin and immediately saluted. But Wu Bin reached out to stop him. Hu Daiden saw Su Li behind Wu Bin. He immediately straightened up and saluted. "Princess Li as well." Su Li nodded slightly and said softly, "Commander Hu, you are too polite. Mrs. Xu and I have a relationship. Can you let me talk to her for a while?" As soon as Su Li said that, Wu Bin was relieved. Su Li had always forgiven Zhu Yan's mistakes without any bottom line. He was really afraid that Su Li would ask to release Zhu Yan, which would be difficult. Hu Daiden didn't think so much. He nodded with a smile and said, "I will obey the princess's order. It's just that all the prisoners must leave the city before noon. Princess, please make it short." Su Li shook her head and smiled faintly. "It's not 7 a.m. yet. It won't take so long. Sorry to bother you, Commander. You flatter me." Hu Daiden revealed a flattered expression, but his heart was filled with endless benefits. He thought to himself that although this princess came from a commoner's background, her etiquette was even more attentive than those young ladies from influential families. It was really incredible. Hu Daiden took his men away. Wu Bin's men were no worse than the royal guards. They were enough to protect Su Li. My Li. Zhu Yan struggled to get up. Seeing that she was surrounded by people of Lord Rui's mansion, she was full of fear and hugged Su Li's thigh tightly. She said, "Li, I really know that I was wrong this time. For the sake that I picked you up and raised you up, please help me." Su Li slightly pursed her lips and bent down to gently push away Zhu Yan's hands, which were full of black mud. Then she gently turned her head and glanced at Wu Bin. Wu Bin immediately understood. He told everyone to turn their backs and not to see or listen. He also stood outside the circle of people and left the space for Su Li. Seeing that Su Li could have such great power with just a look, Zhu Yan was more hopeful. Yes. Now that Su Li was a princess, she could let him go with just a word. Su Li was silent. She squatted down and looked at Zhu Yan, who was only 1 foot away from her. She put her hand into her sleeve and took out a pot of wine and a wine cup. She slowly poured a cup of wine and sent it to Zhu Yan, who was at a loss. "Li, I asked you to help me leave, not to drink. Did you hear what I said?" Zhu Yan grabbed Su Li's hand with one hand, and some wine in the cup spilled out. Looking at her sleeve, which was wet by the wine, Su Li suddenly showed a charming smile. Her silvery laughter rang in Zhu Yan's ear. "Mother, if you drink this cup of farewell wine personally poured by me, maybe I will be in a good mood and help you," Zhu Yan's eyes shone brightly, and she sat up straightly. Are you serious? Of course. When did I tell a lie? Su Li's smile was as innocent as before. But Zhu Yan didn't know the meaning behind this innocent. It was not simple from the beginning. Okay, I will drink. Zhu Yan grabbed the wine cup in Su Li's hand. She was afraid that Su Li would regret, so she drank it up and looked at Su Li with hope. But she was disappointed. Su Li still did nothing but smile more happily. You lied to me. Zhu Yan angrily grabbed Su Li's neckline and stared at Su Li's calm eyes. Her eyes almost spurted fire. You are my daughter and you should listen to me. Ask your men to go away and let me go. I promise that I will never trouble you again and will never come to Yunjing City again. Li. Crack. Su Li grabbed Zhu Yan's hand with one hand and gradually exerted force. Even the sound of bones could be heard. Zhu Yan was so painful that her face was deformed and she was in a cold sweat. She never knew that Su Li, who was as thin as a paper person, had such great strength. She raised her head and caught a glimpse of Su Li's condescending eyes. She didn't know why she suddenly felt cold and stopped struggling. It turned out that Su Li was not a gentle cat that could always be kneaded at will. She didn't know when her momentum became terrible. It seemed that she was born in the royal family and was a proud girl surrounded by stars. Do you remember Mammy Zheng? She is missing, right? Su Li suddenly mentioned a person. Zhu Yan shivered and her face became paler with fear. Do you know where she is? Ha ha ha. Su Li chuckled and leaned to Zhu Yan's ear. She blew a gentle breath. I buried her, in the old forest outside the Desu town. Zhu Yan's body trembled uncontrollably when she heard this. She said, How is it possible? At that time, you were only 14 years old. You were short and thin like a bean sprout. Mammy Zheng was half a body taller than you. She didn't want to believe it. She didn't dare to believe that Su Li had pretended to bear hardships and bullies all the time. She deliberately showed it. Didn't that mean that he, who bullied her like a fool, was a complete and utter fool? It turned out that it was not that she had a tough life, but that she had seen everything and avoided it in a way that she could not understand. And she had foolishly thought that it was God giving her a chance to live again and again. You tried to kill me several times. Mammy Zheng, the killers of the blood refining hall, and then you joined forces with Mam Su Chui. I let you go and forgive you again and again. Do you know why? Su Li turned the wine glass in her hand. Her smile was like a devil in Zhu Yan's eyes, because I want to see what you and the third sister can do in this life. Watching you climb to the highest cliff and then throwing you down with my own hands, that feeling, is the most wonderful, isn't it? Do you remember the binding pill you gave to Mammy Zheng? I remade it and gave it back to you. Enjoy the next journey. You don't have much time. Su Li stood up with a smile. The knot in her heart was untied. She was extremely relaxed at the moment. Zhu Yan's eyes were wide open, as if she saw Su Li for the first time. Such a ruthless, scheming and vicious woman, was she, really Su Li? Slap. Slap. She slapped herself several times desperately. It hurt. It was not a dream. Tears immediately flowed from her bloodshot eyes. She crazily grabbed Su Li's face. She was ferocious and horrible. You are a devil. You are not a human. I am your adoptive mother. How can you be so inhumane? If I die, don't think about living a good life. I will scratch your face. Catch her. Wu Bin immediately turned around and restrained the crazy Zhu Yan. The four of them pressed Zhu Yan's limbs respectively. Zhu Yan could only lie on the ground and groan. Su Li stood up and didn't even look at her. Everything around her seemed to be far away. Chapter 216. After Zhu Yan was dragged away by the royal guards, the street returned to peace. Su Li didn't look at Zhu Yan again and went back without looking back. Wu Bin was confused. The attitude of the miss to Zhu Yan seemed to be very different from the investigation. However, Zhu Yan abused the miss since she was a child. No matter how the miss treated Zhu Yan, it was reasonable. He should be happy that Zhu Yan was punished successfully. Thinking of this, Wu Bin followed Su Li happily. After returning to the affiliated school, Wu Bin took people back. Su Li drove away Yun Yi and others who followed her. She came to the adytum alone. In the middle of the table full of bottles and cans, there was a transparent colorless glass bottle. Su Li came to the table and gently picked up the glass bottle. She squinted her eyes slightly. If she looked carefully in the bottle, she could see a transparent insect shadow wriggling slowly. This was the poisonous child mother insect that she made with the blood of Zhu Yan and the fifth sister Su Yuxing. The poisonous child mother insect had been drunk by Zhu Yan. If Zhu Yan died, the poisonous child mother insect in the bottle would also die. At the same time, she could see the changes of Zhu Yan's body through the poisonous child mother insect. After she refined the heart-rotting pill, it was not a poison that could kill people immediately. At least, Zhu Yan could reach the border of Dehan country alive. Fang Yuan should have set off at this time. I gave you enough opportunities. Let's see if you will show up or not, Su Li murmured to herself and rolled her eyes. The thing about Su Zipei almost failed miserably. What she saw was not the good luck of Zhu Yan and Su Zipei, but the pair of black hands behind them who constantly played tricks behind them. There must be someone behind the manipulator. Now the plan failed, but Zhu Yan and Su Zipei were not dead. If the manipulator was a cautious and ruthless person, he would definitely choose to kill them. So, there was a chance to see the real face of the manipulator. At this time, Mammy Li came in with a banknote and said helplessly, "Miss, you asked me to buy Su Zipei from the broker house. But the boss said that Su Zipei was bought yesterday." Su Li slightly raised her eyebrows. Yesterday was the day when Su Zipei was just sent to the broker house. It was absolutely strange that she was bought on the same day. Who bought it? Seeing that the miss really asked, Mammy Li came over and whispered, "The boss of the broker house didn't want to tell me at first. Later, I scared him with the name of Lord Rui's mansion. Finally, he told me that it was Wu Xiuxiu, the miss of the Wu family who bought Su Zipei." The Wu family. Su Li frowned slightly. After the Wu family was severely damaged, she hadn't heard the news of the Wu family for a long time. With Wu Xiuxiu's narrow-minded mind, it was impossible for her to hide so deeply. Her intuition told her that the person who attacked her was someone else. If she couldn't find out sooner, she would have to guard against that person at all times. However, she could more or less guess the reason why Wu Xiuxiu bought Su Zipei. Perhaps this ending was even more unacceptable for Su Zipei. "Nanny, you can go back to work." Su Li shook her head and said, "Since she has been bought, forget it. Lord Rui's mansion and the Wu family are like fire and water. It's impossible for me to get my third sister back." Mammy Li was a little relieved when she heard that. Although it was a pity that she couldn't see Su Zipei as a servant, when she thought of Wu Xiuxiu's unruly behavior, she also knew that Su Zipei's future life was absolutely not very good. At this moment, Su Zipei, who had lived in the Wu family nervously for a night and changed into maid clothes, was finally brought to Wu Xiuxiu. Wu Xiuxiu closed her eyes and half lay on the soft couch. The maid beside her carefully massaged her calf. Su Zipei walked in front of her, trembling with fear. She made a servant salute and stammered, "Slave, slave Susie pays respect to Miss Sue." Wu Xiuxiu slightly opened her eyes and glanced at Susie Pei. She said lazily, "Susie Pei, are you the bitch's sister? You don't look so good." Speaking of this, the maid beside her gently reminded her. Wu Xiuxiu completely opened her eyes, and the maid immediately helped her tidy up her clothes. "Oh, I forgot that Suli and you are not related by blood. You are now a slave, so you can't have a surname. Let me think of a name for you. How about Thin Horse?" Hearing this, the maids around her couldn't help but laugh. Even Wu Xiuxiu herself laughed. Susie Pei was so ashamed and angry that she almost bit her lips to bleed. She said, "I am not Thin Horse. I just entered the broker house for one day." Skinny horse was the most insulting word for women. Some girls from poor families were bought at low prices and sold at high prices by the middlemen. After they were bought by the rich, they could be abused at will, just like how they used weak horses. Such women were called skinny horses. The more skinny horses the middlemen raised, the more money they earned. Seeing that Susie Pei dared to resist, Wu Xiuxiu looked cold and said, "I didn't let you speak. How dare you refute? Huan, teach her a lesson. You will train her in the future. Let her know what kind of person is qualified to be my servant." "Yes, Mississippi," the little maid beside Wu Xiuxiu responded in a low voice and walked to Susie Pei with small steps. But she didn't show any mercy. She slapped Susie Pei several times. Susie Pei's mouth was full of blood. "Newcomer, you are no longer a miss from a big family. As a servant, you should act like one. Today you offended Mississippi. I must teach you a lesson." "Ah! Stop!" Susie Pei screamed again and again. In a trance, she seemed to go back to 2 years ago. At that time, she asked someone to teach Suli a lesson. Now, the tables had turned. Suli became a princess, but she became the most humble maid. Seeing Susie Pei's miserable situation, Wu Xiuxiu was very happy. She couldn't torture Suli, but she could torture the Su family. Only in this way could the hatred in her heart be relieved a little. "Sister, what are you doing? All of you, stop." Wu Jin walked in and saw the scene. He stopped them. The maids stopped one after another and saluted respectfully, "First master." "Brother, why are you here?" Wu Xiuxiu's eyes were slightly bright. She quickly got up and greeted him. Her brother was busy these days. She was bored to death, so she vented her anger on Susie Pei. Unexpectedly, her brother came today. Wu Jin glanced at Susie Pei, who was beaten black and blue on the ground. He gently touched Wu Xiuxiu's nose and said, The Wu family is not the previous Wu family. You should restrain yourself. It doesn't matter. She is Susie Pei. She is a slave. No matter how I abuse her, no one will know. Susie Pei. Wu Jin's eyes flickered slightly. Which Susie Pei? Which Susie Pei can it be? Wu Xiuxiu pouted and said coquettishly, Brother, you come to see me. How can you talk like a slave? Play with me for a while. Wu Jin stared at Susie Pei, who bowed her head and cried. The sadness in his eyes disappeared immediately. He said, Sister, it is wrong for you to do this. If you want to take revenge, I have a very special way. What way? Wu Xiuxiu's interest was aroused. She grabbed Wu Jin's hand and almost leaned on her brother. She said, Brother, you are the best. You can definitely come up with the most perfect way to help me vent my anger. Wu Jin reluctantly pulled away his sister, who was very clingy. But his chuckle echoed in the room. This time, I will let you have enough fun. In the study of the east courtyard of the Ling mansion, Ling Xian was concentrating on sorting out the files that were sent in the morning. She put the most important ones at the top. These were the things that the master had to deal with immediately today. Master, the Dongfang family will send real seniors to control the auction on the 8th day of the 12th lunar month. Ling Li nodded and took the file. He whispered softly, "It is a good opportunity to spy on the strength of Dongfang Shao. Let the secret department of the Shaolu cult keep an eye on it." "Yes, master." Ling Imo took the file and retreated to the side. Ling Xian took another file and gently opened it. She said, "The spy found that Tianji country and Nanjiang country both sent princes to visit. They will arrive in 3 days." Ling Li slightly raised his eyebrows and bowed his head to ponder. The Wei family of Nanjiang country had always been restless and made enemies everywhere. It was not surprising that they came to Dehan country. But it was strange that the Tantai family, which had never cared about foreign affairs, would intervene in it. Let the people of the Tianya house be prepared. Nanjiang country and Tianji country should keep an eye on them. There can be no mistakes. In addition, how about the manpower of the auction house? Ling Qinglan smiled slightly. After he recovered, he didn't need to worry about overthinking and dying of poison. When it came to conspiracies, he was much more professional than Ling Li. Chapter 217. Seeing the excitement in Ling Qinglan's eyes, Ling Li smiled slightly. For a period of time, Ling Qinglan was extremely resistant to the identity of the Yinma cult. But now, he cared about the Yinma cult more than anyone else. After all, when he just took over the banner of Qinghu of the Yinma cult, although there were many capable people in the cult, it was a mess. Under his arrangement, it became orderly. What Ling Li learned in the previous life was to be alone. He could do well in the spiritual circle alone. But if he was asked to manage a big cult, he felt restrained and restricted. Ling Qinglan learned the art of war from his father when he was a child, and he showed his talent in this aspect very early. Later, although the Yi family was destroyed early, he was secretly adopted by the Ling family. At that time, the second uncle intended to let him take charge of the military affairs and make plans for the battle. But he chose to go to the supreme judiciary. On the one hand, it was for the Yinma cult. The deeper reason was the knot of the Yi family. No one was perfect, and he was not perfect. When it came to managing a sect, he was indeed no match for Ling Qinglan. He was ashamed of this. But when it came to martial arts and people's judgment, he was much better than Ling Qinglan. In the Yinma cult, Qinglan, take this. Ling Li took a file and gave it to Ling Qinglan. Ling Qinglan was slightly stunned. He took it and glanced at it. Then he quickly closed it and said calmly, "I see. I will act according to my discretion. I won't be impulsive." The content of the file was the same as that given by Mr. Li. It was all about Chen Gong's wife. But he didn't let Ling Li know that he had already got the news. Otherwise, according to Ling Li's attitude towards Su Li, he would be hostile to Mr. Li. At that time, if Mr. Li was in trouble, it would be difficult for him to deal with it. Ling Li didn't notice Ling Qinglan's abnormality. No matter how serious the matter was, Ling Qinglan could keep extremely calm, which was quite similar to Ling Imo. After Ling Qinglan and Ling Imo took their orders and left, Ling Li leaned on the wheelchair and gently rubbed his eyebrows. There were too many things to think about recently. Ling Xian cleaned up the messy files on the table and poured a cup of his favorite tea for Ling Li. It was the tea tree that Master cultivated in Dehan country in the early years. Master often said that only he could understand the taste of tea. Now, this tea tree was planted in the backyard of the Pandemonium headquarters. It was looked after by a few old farmers who were good at planting, and it produced quite a lot of tea leaves every year. Ling Li frowned and slowly opened his eyes. Looking at Ling Xian's busy figure, he was silent for a moment and suddenly said, "Ling Xian, do you have anything to hide from me?" As soon as Ling Xian said that, the warm atmosphere in the room suddenly disappeared. Ling Li's cold eyes were full of questioning. The feeling of being almost destroyed hit Ling Xian's heart directly. She was slightly sad. In the end, he still asked. If he told the truth, what would happen? She remembered that on the ship, Mr. Li's provocation made Master, who never showed his real feelings, so angry. What she did undoubtedly violated the taboo. From the beginning, she knew that she would only be farther away from Master. But Master, who she had accompanied for 10 years, was in love with someone else. When she thought of this, she couldn't help it. Master. Ling Xian's eyes were slightly red. She lowered her head and said, "I have something to hide from you. I went out secretly these days and shouldn't delay the affairs of the cult. But recently, I heard the news of my biological parents, so Ling Li was surprised and faintly relieved. I see. You can ask people of the Tianya house to investigate this matter. Why do you do it yourself?" Ling Xian shook her head with tears in her eyes. She whispered, "Recently, the Tianya house has been too busy. How can I delay the business? Back then, they abandoned this servant, but this servant met young Master. I don't hate them, but I don't want to see them again. I just want to take a look at them from a distance. That's enough." Ling Xian's words were sincere. Ling Li's doubt in his heart slowly faded. If Ling Xian said that she found out where her parents were, it was reasonable that she often peeped at them and didn't want to be followed by others. After all, she was the holy girl of the Yinma cult and the sacred symbol of the cult. If she showed her weakness, it would inevitably lose the prestige of the cult. Tell Ling Mo where your parents live and let him send someone to protect them secretly. Anyway, they are your biological parents. Don't hide this kind of thing from me next time. Ling Li's voice was low and gentle. Ling Xian felt warm and gently nodded. She had already found someone to pretend to be her biological parents. Finally, she passed the test. What is Su Li doing recently? Ling Li said suddenly, and the timing was perfect. Ling Xian almost blurted out Su Li's activities in the past few days. But she immediately realized it and whispered, "I'm going to ask Ling Qinglan if there is any news." Seeing Ling Xian turn around and leave, the last doubt in Ling Li's eyes faded. He really didn't want to use this method to test Ling Xian. But if he didn't try, how could he rest assured? A woman's mind was the most difficult to fathom. Like Ling Shui, he had clearly handed over the Ling family to her and chose to become a mercenary to wander alone, but she still wanted to kill him. They were biological siblings. Why did she do this? He thought about the previous life and thought about it for more than 10 years in this life, but he still had no answer. Ling Xian gently closed the door and walked out of the yard. There was no one around. Finally, she couldn't help squatting down. Tears rolled down from her eyes. 8 years ago, the little girl shook the sleeves of the child and asked curiously, "Master, what kind of woman do you like?" "Well, let me think about it. She should be more gentle and less unruly. I don't want to be entangled with a moody woman in my life. Because of what you said, I picked up a small fan, learned from everyone's etiquette, and served by your side, desperately trying to become the person you said." But Su Li was clearly unruly, unreasonable, and moody. Why did you see her in your eyes, in your heart, and in your mouth? I was clearly by your side, but you refused to look at me. Ling Xian clutched her chest and breathed softly. Something was hurting and breaking. She was unwilling to give up the result after waiting for 10 years. Child gradually changed. He never let personal feelings affect the affairs of the cult, but now because of Su Li, he almost killed Mr. Li, who was beneficial to the cult. Su Li was a scourge. Ling Xian stopped crying and slowly calmed down. She wiped the tears from her eyes and ran the genuine energy. The redness and swelling around her eyes faded away. Her face returned to normal, and a black light flashed in her eyes. In most cases, the Yinma cult was governed by the child's words. But if the decision made by the child was harmful to the cult, she could take advantage of it a lot. 3 days later, Tianji country and Nanjiang country arrived in Yunjing city on the same day as if they had discussed it. They wrote a letter to the emperor. The princes of the two countries visited on the same day. The Han country naturally attached great importance to it. It immediately sent Hu Daiden to greet them and lead them to live in the state guest building. The Zhongtan road was heavily guarded by the royal guards as in the previous 2 days. They escorted a large number of exotic teams and countless expensive exotic gifts. At the same time, intelligence agencies of countless forces in Yunjing city also took action. They collected the information of the princes of the two countries by all means. The Wei family of Nanjiang country sent the 4th prince and the 6th princess. They are Wei Yuran and Wei Xinjin respectively. There is only one prince in Tianji country. But the news in Tianji country is always not well informed. I don't know the specific names of the princes. After reading the files sent by Chu Lu, Su Li couldn't help but ponder. They came to the Nanjiang country at this time for friendly exchanges on the surface, but everyone knew secretly that they came for the full moon and heartstrings at the auction. Su Li didn't expect that the full moon and heartstrings could be so attractive. In the spiritual circle, the full moon and heartstrings was not so precious. In the hands of the major sects, there were many more precious treasures in the Zifu. But now, she realized that she was in the secular world after all. There were very few people in the martial arts circle who could enter the spiritual circle. Although a warrior at the peak of the inborn realm with the full moon and heartstrings was not as good as a warrior in the longevity realm, he could definitely defeat an ordinary warrior at the peak of the inborn realm within 10 moves. To the various sects and family forces, it was an absolute deterrent. The Dongfang family could auction this kind of thing. Chapter 218. The next day, Dongfang Shao, the emperor of the Dehan country, solemnly received the princes of the two countries. According to hundreds of officials, the two princes brought a lot of novel gifts. The atmosphere in the Yangxin Hall was harmonious. The emperor laughed several times and was very happy. Among them, it was worth mentioning that the mechanical man brought by the prince of the Tianji country could write automatically. Although it was just a few fixed blessings, it was enough to be amazing. The news quickly spread to all directions of Yunjing city. Su Li was in the affiliated school of the National Academy. Mammy Li also heard a lot and came back to tell the miss. But she didn't know that Su Li had already got more detailed information from Chu Lu. The trees were lush outside the house, and the sandalwood fragrance was curling up inside the house. It was really quiet. Su Li destroyed the file with one hand and narrowed her eyes slightly. She was lost in thought. In her previous life, after she achieved great cultivation, she returned to the Dehan country and focused on revenge. Except for investigating the origin of her disabled husband, she turned a deaf ear to everything else. She didn't have much contact with the Nanjiang country or the Tianji country. However, no matter whether the two princes came for the full moon and heartstrings or not, she had to find out the details of them, especially the Wei family. If she guessed right, the enemy of Fang Yuan and others was undoubtedly the Wei family. If she could, she didn't mind collecting some interest for Fang Yuan and others before the auction fair. And the Wanjian sect, Su Li rubbed her eyebrows and couldn't help but have a headache. When Ting Shan learned a strange disguising skill. He could disguise others. Even warriors at the peak of the inborn realm couldn't see the clues. This brought convenience to everyone in the Leanly building. But he couldn't disguise himself. What was more exaggerated was that no disguising skill or disguising elixir could work on his face. There was a life token of Wenting Shan in the Wanjian sect. It contained Wenting Shan's pneuma. It could be activated by a secret method to track Wenting Shan's whereabouts. Although the scope of the secret method was very large, Wenting Shan couldn't disguise himself. If the Wanjian sect and the Dongfang family united, it wouldn't take long to thoroughly investigate a person in Yunjing City. She had set a tactical matrix around Wenting Shan's room to isolate Wenting Shan's pneuma, but it was just a temporary measure. She needed to think of another plan to solve it. After breakfast, Suli went out of the courtyard and entered the real National Academy with the books she borrowed from the National Book Tower 2 days ago. There was only a wall between the National Academy and the affiliated school of the National Academy. No one guarded it, so there was no need to show the jade token. At this moment, it was the morning class. There was a rhythmic sound of reading mixed with the shouts of practicing martial arts. Suli stared at it and saw that the young warriors who had just entered the school were sweating profusely in the martial arts field. She went all the way to the National Book Tower. The forest road was deserted. At this time, no one went to the National Book Tower except for the lecturers who were resting in the National Academy. The arrogant gatekeeper checked Suli's jade token and let her in as usual. With Dongfang Rui's relationship, the entire National Book Tower was open to her. She could even read the Xiangong mental methods collected by the National Academy on the top floor at will. Dongfang Rui said that if she wanted, she could also go to the study of the Dongfang family in the Imperial Palace. The cultivation method of the Dongfang family was the real trump card of the Dongfang family. Although Suli wanted to have a look, she had to be afraid of the power behind Dongfang Shao. It was unwise to go there rashly. She didn't think that Dongfang Shao would show mercy to her because of his niece after he saw through her. Just as Suli walked into the National Book Tower, 3 people came to the tower, 2 men and 1 woman. The one who led the way was the eldest prince, Dongfang Xing. He had a faint smile on his face and looked dignified as the eldest prince. Along the way, he chatted happily with the other 2 people. When they came to the front of the book tower, he suddenly smiled and said, "Brother Yuran, this is the holy land of our National Academy, the National Book Tower." The man who was called brother by Dongfang Xing had a handsome face, but he exuded a feminine atmosphere. Although his smile was gentle, it always reminded people of the word viper. He looked up and down, nodded and praised, "It is really a magnificent building. Brother Xing, can you take me and my sister in to have a look?" This person was the second prince of Nanjiang country, Wei Yuran. The charming woman with a somewhat barbaric temperament beside him was Wei Zhenjin, Wei Yuran's sister and also the heir of the empress. Of course. Wei Yuran's attitude was very humble. Dongfang Xing enjoyed it very much and immediately took the 2 into the National Book Tower. Dongfang Xing was the eldest son of the Dongfang family and the most orthodox bloodline of the Dongfang family. The old man who checked the jade token did not dare to neglect them and quickly let them in. His attitude was quite different from that of treating Suli. This performance immediately made Dongfang Xing proud and he was more happy. If he could entertain the brother and sister of the Wei family well, he could show a satisfactory answer in front of his father. In fact, he wanted to entertain the prince of Tianji country more. After all, the prince was the one who really made his father happy. Nanjiang country was just the second one. Unfortunately, the prince disappeared as soon as he left the imperial palace. He couldn't find him for a long time. Finally, he had to settle for the second one. A group of 3 people entered the National Book Tower. Wei Zhenjin, who walked at the back, muttered something in a very low voice. What a magnificent building. It is made of bricks and stones. It is obviously a place where the dead live. It is really unlucky. Dong Fangxing did not hear Wei Zhenjin's words because he stepped into the tower at this moment and saw Su Li, who was about to go upstairs. His eyes were slightly bright and he immediately caught up with her. He did not forget to shout, "Sisterly, please wait." Su Li frowned slightly. She just noticed that there was someone at the door and wanted to go upstairs to hide, but she did not expect that she was still seen. In desperation, she could only go downstairs and came to Dong Fangxing. She saluted and said respectfully, "First Prince, Su Li." Su Li didn't wear any makeup today. She was plain and didn't look very amazing with her amazing beauty. However, her skin was fair and flawless, tender and smooth like a baby's. Her exquisite and small facial features set off an ethereal aura. Coupled with the few books in her arms, she gave off a clean and comfortable temperament. Wei Yuran looked at her for a few more times. The more he looked, the more surprised and amazed he was. How could there be such a clean woman in the world? She was like a lotus that had just emerged from the water, untainted by dust. Wei Zhenjin subconsciously touched her face and felt jealous in her heart. Although she did not want to admit it, the woman's skin was indeed better than hers. How did she maintain her skin? She must get the method. Dong Fangxing let out a gentle laugh and pretended to be intimate. He said, "Sisterly, you can't do that. You are eighth uncle's precious daughter and my cousin. If eighth uncle knows that you are so polite to me and I accept it calmly, he will blame me." Su Li chuckled and blinked her crystal-clear eyes. "That's my fault. I don't know why you stopped me, cousin brother." Knowing that Su Li was joking, Dong Fangxing was slightly relieved and hurriedly introduced the three people present to each other. However, there was always a thorn in his heart. The matter of the Hehuan sect. The paper could not cover the fire. It would be exposed one day. At that time, how would the Eighth Lord treat him? Before that, if he could get Su Li's favor, he might be able to drive away the disaster in the future. This was also the reason why he stopped Su Li hurriedly after seeing her. It turns out to be Princess Li. "I am Wei Yuran of Nanjiang country. This is my sister Wei Zhenjin. Nice to meet you." Wei Yuran smiled politely and behaved like a gentleman. "Your Highness, you are so polite." Su Li also returned the courtesy with a gentle smile. Next, Su Li was invited to tour the National Academy together. On the surface, they talked happily and the atmosphere was extremely harmonious. During the tour, Wei Zhenjin asked Su Li about the method of skin maintenance. After Su Li helplessly said that it was natural, Wei Zhenjin obviously didn't believe it. She rolled her eyes and no one knew what she was thinking. Wei Yuran apologized for Wei Zhenjin repeatedly, but he didn't know that Su Li had seen through the background of the brother and sister without a trace. Wei Yuran, the acquired ninth hurdle. Wei Zhenjin, the acquired limit. The cultivation of the brother and sister was absolutely second to none in Dehan country. Among the three princes that she saw in the autumn hunting, the fifth prince, Dong Fangyang, had the highest cultivation. He was in the acquired seventh hurdle. Dong Fanglang and Dong Fangxing were both good at scheming, which delayed their practice. Their cultivation was lower than that of Dong Fangyang. They were only in the acquired sixth hurdle. The cultivation level of Nanjiang country was much higher than that of Dehan country. However, if Wei Zhenjin got the full moon and heartstrings, it was possible for her to dominate the martial arts circle and stabilize the situation in the future. Chapter 219. It was not until the evening that the four people finished their tour. Seeing that Su Li was about to leave, Wei Yuran quickly stopped her and said, "It's late. It's not safe for Princess Li to leave alone. Why don't we send you off first? Before Wei Yuran finished his words, he was interrupted by Dong Fangxing with a smile. "Brother Yuran, don't worry. Sisterly lives in the National Academy. It's a treasure place for cultivating talents in our Dahan country. Even people at the peak of the inborn realm may not be able to leave here alive. Sisterly won't be in any danger." Then, Wei Yuran and Su Li both had the same idea. Dong Fangxing's unintentional words exposed the arrangement of the Dongfang family in the National Academy. Su Li suddenly understood why Wei Yuran didn't choose the third prince or the fifth prince, but chose the stupidest first prince. Su Li excused herself and turned away. Wei Yuran looked at her back and didn't move for a long time. Dong Fangxing couldn't help but tease, "Brother Yuran, she has gone far." Wei Yuran seemed to be awakened. He struggled and couldn't help but ask, "Brother Xing, there's one thing I don't understand. I shouldn't inquire about it according to the etiquette, but..." Dong Fangxing laughed. After a day, he had been coaxed by Wei Yuran. He immediately said, "Don't worry, Brother Yuran. The thing about Sisterly is not a big secret in Yunjing City. Let me explain it to you." Then, Dong Fangxing explained the reason clearly without any concealment. "So, Princess Li is also a master of medical circle and the first genius in Yunjing City?" Wei Yuran was amazed. He didn't expect that Su Li, who was very modest all the way, had so many identities. He subconsciously looked at his sister. Wei Xinjin's eyes suddenly flashed with disdain and anger. How could a princess who grew up in the ordinary people compare with her? She was regarded as the first genius of Nanjiang country by her father since she was a child. She was the brightest pearl of the whole empire. But she was in the acquired 8th hurdle. How could she compete with me? Wei Xinjin suddenly stopped being angry, and a hint of playfulness flashed in her eyes. This time, Nanjiang country used all its power just to get the full moon and heartstrings. When she broke through the inborn realm, her lifespan would be greatly increased, and she could even become a practitioner of the longevity realm. She would be beautiful forever. 100 years later, Su Li was just an old woman with a wrinkled face, or even a pile of yellow soil. She was too immature to care so much about a dead person. The more Wei Xinjin thought about it, the more she felt that the future would develop like this. She raised her eyebrows and regained her arrogance. She stood still like a proud peacock and didn't look at Su Li's back anymore. Wei Yuran was shocked by his sister's sudden change. But Dong Fangxing was still there, so it was not appropriate for him to ask. He could only wait patiently until Dong Fangxing sent them back to the state guest house and left. Hearing his sister's amazing theory, Wei Yuran didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He touched his sister's head and said dotingly, "Xinjin is certainly the best. I'm just a little surprised by Su Li's clean temperament. How can a common woman with some medical skills compare with our Xinjin?" Wei Xinjin still didn't give up. She pouted and said angrily, "No. I hate Su Li very much. I don't want to see her face again. Brother, please help me." Wei Yuran quickly coaxed his sister and said that he would deal with it after the auction fair. Wei Xinjin also knew that the auction fair was the top priority. She didn't dare to make trouble at the moment and quietly ran to practice. She had always known that the reason why she was able to obtain the position of imperial father was not because of her imperial mother, nor was it because of her beauty. It was because of her exceptional talent for cultivation that she had displayed from the very beginning. At this moment, when Su Li returned to the affiliated school of the National Academy, she saw Mammy Li standing in front of the school in the front room with embarrassment. Mammy Li didn't know whether to go or go in. When she heard the footsteps, she turned around and saw Su Li coming back. She immediately greeted her and whispered, "Miss, there is a very strange young man in the school. No matter what I say, he doesn't leave. It seems that he can't hear me. And, It seems that the people of the Lord Roy's mansion who are guarding outside didn't find him. Suli slightly raised her eyebrows and looked at the back of the young man in white who was carrying her in the room. She asked Mammy to go to work first and walked into the empty school by herself. The lights suddenly dimmed. The young man in white noticed that there was someone behind him. He turned around with a smile on his face. This was a strange face that Suli had never seen before. But Suli recognized his identity at a glance from the pneuma he exuded when he was practicing. Senior fellow apprentice. Suli tried to sound him out with a smile. The young man laughed out. His voice was low and magnetic. Junior sister apprentice, you have a keen intuition. I have obviously restrained my pneuma, but I was still recognized by you at a glance. I'm really ashamed. Suli smiled slightly. This person's cultivation was not low. He had reached the inborn fifth hurdle. But it was not enough for him to completely restrain his pneuma in front of her. Senior fellow apprentice, you come back suddenly. What's the matter? Suli walked over and picked up the teapot on the table. She poured a cup of tea for the young man with a slight smile. The young man took it, and his eyes flashed with surprise. He thought that Suli would definitely be a little surprised to see him, even if her reaction was not very big. But Suli's reaction was as plain water, not to mention surprise. Suli seemed to be a little different from what his master said. The young man shook his head slightly and got rid of distracting thoughts. He smiled warmly and said, this time, I am ordered to come here for junior sister apprentice. Ordered. Most of them were ordered by Enchanting. Why did he come here for me? Suli was slightly surprised and asked, what do you mean? The young man did not answer. Instead, he smiled and said, Yunjing City will not be peaceful in the future. Junior sister apprentice, your cultivation is still shallow. It's better to go out less. Suli's eyes flickered slightly. She suddenly asked, is it because of the auction on the 8th day of the 12th lunar month? I am afraid that you will be disappointed. Then she opened the drawer and took out a blue invitation to the Yunjing auction. The young man's pupils shrank slightly when he saw it. He asked, why do you have this thing? I am not the child in the master's words. Suli said softly and finally took off a layer of disguise. She said, Master asked me to live here to let me gain experience. I can think of these. If Master knows it, he will be happy. The young man looked at Suli and fell into silence. Enchanting asked him to go to Yunjing City for the auction and to protect his junior sister apprentice. In the master's words, his junior sister apprentice had always been an innocent, pure and kind girl next door. But when he really got in touch with her, he found that his junior sister apprentice's temperament had already been honed. She was not innocent, but scheming, which made her feel unpredictable. This kind of gap made it difficult for him to accept for a while. But what on earth did the junior sister apprentice experience in the past 6 months? The young man's eyes were slightly gloomy. He sat opposite to Suli and drank tea quietly. He did not speak again. Many thoughts flashed through his mind. Unconsciously, the tea was drunk. The young man suddenly came to his sense and smiled warmly. He said, I came in a hurry today, and I didn't bring any gift for you. I will come to bother you after I prepare. It's getting late. I should go. Suli stood up to see him off. She said, Senior fellow apprentice, it's good that you can come to see me. You don't need a gift. It's dangerous at night. Please be careful. The young man's eyes flashed and he still said with a smile, of course. As a senior fellow apprentice, I have the reason not to give you a gift. Then he didn't wait for Suli to say anything. His figure melted into the darkness and quietly left. The night wind blew, and the young man flew all the way. After passing through a dark alley, he changed out of his white clothes and put on a light golden slim-fitting long robe and a white cloak. Behind him, there was an additional hunchbacked servant. The servant carefully put the luxurious golden crown on the young man and said softly, "Fourth Lord, during the time when you disappeared, people in the state guest house almost went crazy looking for you." The young man narrowed his eyes slightly and smiled coldly. He didn't want to answer. He was still thinking about Suli at the moment. Although Suli was polite just now, she didn't even ask his name. The first meeting with his junior sister apprentice was not ideal. However, he was not discouraged. As long as he figured out what happened to his junior sister apprentice in Yunjing this month, he could sort out the situation. Let's go back first. Looking at the pedestrians on the road, the young man stepped forward without taking a sedan chair. The manservant behind him immediately followed him quickly. Chapter 220. Seeing Tan Taiyu enter the gate of the state guest house, Su Li, who was hiding in the dark, turned away. She didn't ask the identity of her senior fellow apprentice, because she chose to see it by herself. In fact, as she expected, her senior fellow apprentice had an extraordinary background. Thinking of the mechanism in the underground addendum and the golden crown on his head, he could only be the prince of Tianji country except for Wei Yuran. He used to be the apprentice of Qi Xianqing, the royal preceptor of Dehan country, but he was the prince of Tianji country. Su Li was lost in thought. There was a lot of information. For Qi Xianqing, although the old man was really good to her and gave her a big gift after she was reborn, she had never opened her heart to Qi Xianqing. In addition to the fact that she had just been reborn and could not trust anyone, it was also because of Qi Xianqing's mysterious background. In the previous life, she had heard the news of Qi Xianqing when she was successful in cultivation. His age and origin were secrets. The longest lifespan of a warrior of the inborn realm was 200 years. He lived for more than 200 years. He broke the taboo and was not tolerated by the world. Some people said that he was not a human, so he had a long life. In this way, she was naturally vigilant to the apprentice of Qi Xianqing. If this person was ordered by Qi Xianqing to take the full moon and heartstrings, what should she do? Su Li's expression changed for a few seconds and soon calmed down. The full moon and heartstrings was of great use to her. She couldn't give it to others easily. In the following days, Su Li prepared the things for the auction in the affiliated school. Tan Taiyu was attracted by the three princes and couldn't leave. He didn't come again. As the time of the auction approached, the atmosphere in Yunjing City became tense. More and more disputes broke out suddenly. Hu Dayton was busy for a while. Fortunately, the martial arts forces were still afraid of the Dongfang family. Otherwise, Hu Dayton would have been thrown into the moat to feed the fish with his cultivation. Chu Lute sent a lot of detailed information about the forces in Yunjing City. She had been dormant in Yunjing City for many years. In addition, Elder Dao lost his fighting power because of Su Li. He had gone back to the headquarters of the Hehuan sect. The new elder hadn't come yet. The control of the branch of the Hehuan sect naturally fell into her hands. Su Li didn't look at it again after a few glances. She didn't care about these small forces. Only a few forces could influence the result of the auction. She had to be well prepared to deal with all unknown changes. On the 5th day of the 12th lunar month, it snowed heavily in Yunjing City. The whole Yunjing City was covered with heavy snow in a blink of an eye. It was quiet between heaven and earth. Even the sound of fighting in the streets could not spread far. Young master, be careful not to catch a cold. Ling Li stood under the eaves and stared at the sky calmly. Ling Xian put a cloak on him considerately. The master and the servant stood in the courtyard, which outlined a quiet and beautiful picture. Is there any movement from Mr. Li? Ling Li suddenly said and broke the silence. Ling Xian's smile froze on her face. Master asked Mr. Li, but she heard Su Li. Mr. Li's whereabouts have always been erratic. It is said that he has not appeared in the Linli building for many days. Ling Xian calmed herself down and answered. What she said was true. She had the idea of meeting with Mr. Li to seek cooperation. Unfortunately, Mr. Li had disappeared for many days. She could only restrain her thoughts and continue to wait. Ling Li's expression remained unchanged, but his eyes were gloomy. No one knew what he was thinking. In the state guest house, the forces of Tianji country and the forces of Nanjiang country each occupied half. Although they tested each other, they restrained each other. As there were only 3 days left before the auction, the restraint became more and more obvious. Fourth Lord, I found it. Another force of the Wei family in Yunjing City is in the embroidery workshop. A handsome young man who looked like a manservant ran to Tan Taiyu and whispered in his ear. Tan Taiyu looked indifferent and waved his hand. The handsome young man immediately retreated and closed the door. At the moment when the manservant closed the door, there was one more person in the room. Tan Taiyu was surprised and bowed his head to salute. Master, you are here. Qi Xianqing stroked his white beard and said with a smile, How is it, you? Have you seen your junior sister apprentice? Tan Taiyu nodded with a wry smile and told the general situation of meeting Su Li. Qi Xianqing was surprised and immediately felt more gratified. He said, The girl finally matured. I am afraid that she suffered a lot in Yunjing in the past 6 months. Master, you don't know. In fact, junior sister apprentice is the biological daughter of Dongfang Rui. Tan Taiyu lowered his voice a lot. Qi Xianqing was slightly stunned. There was a complex expression in his eyes. He sighed, I deliberately avoided Dongfang Shao in these years. I was afraid to have a relationship with the Dongfang family again. I didn't expect that man proposes but God disposes. Tan Taiyu heard the words and said with a smile, Master, don't worry. Junior sister apprentice is still surnamed Su. She hasn't returned to the Dongfang family. Qi Xianqing was stunned and asked, Why? Tan Taiyu told him about his investigation. Qi Xianqing was silent. He didn't expect that Su Li experienced so many things in Yunjing in less than a year. When Qi Xianqing heard that Zhu Yan and Su Zipei were imprisoned and punished respectively, Su Li finally didn't plead for them. Qi Xianqing's eyes were wet. This girl finally lost her kind heart and learned to seek justice for herself. Now Yunjing is mixed with crooks and honest people. I just found out that there are activities of the Hehuan sect and the Lianshi cult. Not to mention that this place is the base camp of the Yinmo cult. Maybe our actions are seen by them. If we want to help junior sister apprentice get the full moon and heartstrings, I am afraid. Tan Taiyu was worried and told the purpose of this trip. He and Qi Xianqing appeared here to help Su Li get the full moon and heartstrings. Qi Xianqing was silent for a moment and said slowly in a low voice, have you ever blamed me? Tan Taiyu suddenly raised his head and looked shocked. He said, Master, you saved my life and taught me everything. I can't repay you. How can I blame you? Qi Xianqing sighed in a low voice and said, But there can only be one successor in each generation of the Ghost Valley. The next master of the Ghost Valley is your junior sister apprentice. Although you practice the Ghost Valley meditation direction, I can't even give you the title of a formal disciple. Tan Taiyu heard the words and suddenly smiled gently and brightly. He said, Master, why do you care about these empty titles? I don't care. There are not many things that I can grasp in my short life. I am very lucky to meet you. Since Junior Sister Apprentice is expected to regain the glory of the Ghost Valley, I will fulfill your wish even if I have to sacrifice my life. This sentence was sincere, and even Qi Xianqing couldn't help but be moved. The heartless mentality that had been built for more than 100 years was like a smooth mirror. There was a crack and a light sound was heard. Cough, cough, cough. Qi Xianqing coughed violently and spat out black blood. Tan Taiyu was immediately shocked and wanted to support Qi Xianqing, but he was stopped by Qi Xianqing. Tan Taiyu said a few words that he couldn't understand. It's okay. I deserve it. It's an old problem. After breathing for a moment, Qi Xianqing calmed down and looked at Tan Taiyu with a more complicated expression. It's my luck to meet you, in the Hongyan house. Miss Chu, I haven't seen you for many years. The coquettish voice echoed in the air. When Chu Lu saw the new elder of the Hehuan sect, she turned pale and her blood almost froze. The hierarch actually sent him out. Could Mr. Li really deal with him? Don't worry, Miss Chu. As long as I am here, no matter the Lianshi cult or the Yinmo cult, they can't take the full moon and heartstrings from me. The young man, who was more coquettish than a woman, smiled and squinted. He said, that is the gift I want to give to Sister Hierarch. In the huge embroidery workshop in Yunjing City, senior embroidery artificers came and went. In the corner courtyard of the embroidery workshop, a group of people in black who knew nothing about embroidery gathered together. Remember, we are all the most loyal dogs to our master. Even if we die, we will help our master get the full moon and heartstrings. Lin Yanqing stood upright in the crowd and looked indifferent. When he heard the leader's words, his eyes flickered slightly and he looked gloomy. He was not a dog. He had been struggling at death's door for only one purpose. He had lost all his potential in exchange for a high cultivation. Revenge. He wanted all the people who had destroyed him to die without a place to be buried. The Su family and the Yen family, when I get out of trouble, you all wash your necks and wait for me. In the third prince's mansion. Tao Xisang looked solemn and looked at the Yunjing City auction house. Teacher, I have prepared everything for you. I wish you a victory. Dongfang Lang appeared behind him and saluted respectfully. Behind him, there were hundreds of expressionless corpse puppets of the inborn realm. Under the attic, 8 elders of the Lianshi cult bowed to him from a distance. This time, I must fight for a future for the Lianshi cult. In the Dongguan pavilion of the Yangxin Palace. Dongfang Shao was lying on the bed calmly, and a large number of elite guards in black knelt down in front of him. There were about 40 or 50 of them, and each of them was at least in the inborn 5th hurdle. The whole Dongguan pavilion was trembling with the slight breathing sound when their breaths were mixed together. Reporting to Patriarch, everyone has assembled. The leader raised his head and said. He didn't call Dongfang Shao the emperor, but the head of the family. They were the real power to maintain the Dongfang family's control of the world. Dongfang Shao narrowed his eyes, and a cunning light flashed in his turbid eyes. He said, remember, your task is not to kill the enemy, but to find out the details of all the forces, especially the Yinmo cult and the Linli building. These two forces hid too deeply. Even though he had controlled the Dehan country for more than 10 years, he not only failed to uproot the Yinmo cult, but also didn't know whether the hierarch child was a man or a woman. How aggrieved he was. And Mr. Li was also mysterious. No one knew whether he was a man or a woman. His power was the most terrible. Child Li and Mr. Li, are there any connections between them? Dongfang Shao played with the rui in his hand, and his eyes were cold. He said, it is a good deal to exchange the information of these two people with a full moon and heartstrings. Chapter 221. The rooster crowed, and the sky shimmered. Lingli, who was lying on the bed, suddenly opened his eyes. His cultivation method was special. He didn't need to keep the posture of meditation. He could practice even lying down or walking. "Master, get up." Ling Xian came quickly. Lingli got dressed. Although she was the holy girl of the Yinmo cult, she was willing to stay with Lingli and take care of him. After breakfast, Lingli sat in the wheelchair and pondered. He took the box of silver needles and hesitated for a moment. Then he sealed his tendons and meridians and became a disabled person temporarily. "Master," Ling Xian called him with a little worry. Even if the tendons and meridians were unlocked immediately, they would be blocked. If a strong enemy attacked at that time, Lingli would be in danger. Lingli shook his head and smiled. "It doesn't matter. You and Ling Imo can protect me. I have enough time to react." Hearing that, Ling Xian raised her pink lips and said in a low voice, "I will protect the young master." At this time, Ling Imo came in from the door with a dignified look. "Master, the carriage is ready." Lingli propped up his body with his hands and changed his sitting posture. He waved his hand lazily and smiled evilly. "Let's go. If we are late, there will be no fun." In the yard, Ling Qinglan was already waiting in front of the carriage. Chiao Meng stood in front of the door and said worriedly, "Qinglan, take good care of your brother." She knew how dangerous the auction fair was, but she couldn't stop Lingli from going. She could only hope that there would be no big trouble at the auction fair. Ling Qinglan smiled and nodded. "Don't worry, Aunt. Even if something happens to me, I won't let brotherly be in danger." But he cursed in his heart. Even if there was danger, Ling Li's cultivation was enough to defeat those dregs. The only thing he needed to worry about was that his identity would be exposed. "Oh, mother. This is Yunjing City. There is no danger at the foot of the emperor. Qinglan, let's go. If we are late, we can't go in." Lingli impatiently patted the wheelchair. The crown on his head, which was straightened by Chiao Meng, was crooked again. If he didn't wear luxurious clothes, he would look like a street punk. Chiao Meng was so angry that her face turned blue. She scolded, "Li, get off. You are not allowed to go today. Look at what you're wearing. How can you ruin the hair that Xian combed for you? If you continue like this, who would be willing to marry you?" Lingli was annoyed and hurriedly urged Ling Qinglan to leave. Fortunately, Chiao Meng just got angry and didn't really stop them. The carriage left smoothly. Looking at the direction where the carriage left, Chiao Meng sighed. What she said was true. Ling Ping didn't marry, and Ling Li couldn't marry. She and her mother didn't know when they could have grandchildren. It was really unfortunate. On the other side, Suli walked out of the affiliated school of the National Academy and stepped on the carriage. Yun Yi, who acted as a groom, was excited. After staying dormant in Yunjing City to practice for many days, the 10 guards of Yunj could finally put their skills to use. Before 7 a.m., the Yunjing auction house was almost full of carriages. Fortunately, the auction house was originally set up around the Shenwu Square. The carriages that couldn't stop were driven there by the royal guards. Suli had a distinguished status now, so she didn't need to go far. The carriage stopped in the small square set up by the auction house. As soon as she got off, she saw many familiar faces in the previous life. Suli knew them, but they didn't know her. After glancing at them, Suli didn't look at them carefully. She took out the blue invitation card. The guards on both sides immediately saluted and said, "Welcome, Your Grace." This sentence immediately attracted the attention of the people around. Unfortunately, Suli walked so fast that they only saw Yunyi's back. Suli entered the auction house through a special passage. It was deserted. At this moment, most of the people were still waiting in line outside. The auction house wouldn't really open until 7 a.m. When she just stood still, a manservant greeted her and said with a smile, "Your Grace, your room is on the 3rd floor. I'll take you there." Suli nodded slightly. When she was about to walk, she suddenly stopped and looked at another entrance of the auction house. "Oh, isn't it Child Ling without legs, the first child in Yunjing?" Ma Jintian walked forward and sneered at Lingli maliciously. He and Lingli were sworn enemies. It was not easy for him to see no one beside Lingli. How could he not ridicule Lingli? Lingli was lying lazily on the back of the chair. When he heard the words, his ears moved. He tilted his head and squinted at Ma Jintian. He didn't show weakness and said with a smile, "I was wondering who it was. It turns out that you are the second master in Yunjing City. It's a pleasure to meet you." Then, Lingli glanced at Ma Jintian's crotch quietly. "You." Ma Jintian was immediately annoyed and sneered, "You have been a good-for-nothing for more than 10 years. You only know how to talk. Do you know why no one takes you to the VIP room?" Lingli was peeling his nails in boredom. When he heard Ma Jintian's words, he raised his head with interest and said, "I was wondering who was so childish. As I expected, only you, the 3rd master, can do such a stupid thing." "Oh, now it should be the 2nd master, ha ha ha," Lingli laughed happily, but Ma Jintian's face was as black as the bottom of a pot. He was the 3rd son in his family, so Lingli gave him the ugly title of 3rd Ma. Today, Lingli went too far. He even insulted Ma Jintian with 2nd Ma. He couldn't bear it. At this moment, 2 people came in. They were Wei Yuran and Wei Zhenjin from Nanjiang country. Wei Yuran felt strange when he saw Ma Jintian's angry face. He had met the 3rd master of the Ma family before. He was not a person who was easily angered. Why was he so angry with the young man in the wheelchair? When Wei Yuran saw Ma Jintian also saw him. In Nanjiang country, the Ling family killed the most soldiers of Nanjiang country. Ma Jintian's eyes brightened. He hurried to greet Wei Yuran and said with a smile, "Brother Yuran, I haven't seen you for a long time. I'm so sorry to let you see my ugly behavior." Wei Yuran shook his head to show that it was okay. Then he looked at Lingli with doubt and asked, "This is, oh, let me introduce him." Ma Jintian's eyes flashed with viciousness. He stared at Lingli and said word by word, "Brother Yuran, you don't know. This is the first child in Yunjing City. He is the 3rd son of the King of North, Lingli of the Ling family." Wei Yuran couldn't help laughing when he heard the first half of the words. Such a playboy dared to call himself the first child? When he heard the second half of the words, the smile on his face immediately disappeared. His eyes were full of killing intent. "Are you the descendant of the Ling family?" Lingli didn't show weakness. He raised his eyebrows and sneered, "So what? This is the territory of Dehan country. Do you dare to kill me?" Chapter 222. Haha, they looked at each other for a moment, but it also seemed that a century had passed. Wei Yuran finally looked away, and his smile became genial and bright. Ma Jintian breathed a sigh of relief. If Wei Yuran really killed Lingli, the consequences would be unimaginable. Fortunately, he didn't misjudge Wei Yuran's thoughts. At this time, Wei Yuran suddenly walked to Lingli. He waved his folding fan and looked around the wheelchair. He smiled and said, "It turns out that the 3rd son of the Lord of North has leg problems. No wonder I didn't see you on the battlefield. But, everyone in the Ling family is powerful. How can there be a waste like you? I want to have a try." Speaking of this, Wei Yuran's gloomy and cold lips curled up. Suddenly, he kicked the wheelchair hard. "Brother Yuran!" Ma Jintian exclaimed, but he was happy in his heart. Someone taught Ling Li a lesson for him. This kick was the best way to vent his anger. Ling Li was frightened and held the chair tightly. But Wei Yuran was in the acquired 8th hurdle. He was so strong that he lifted Ling Li and the chair down the stairs and rolled to the middle of the auction stage. Ah! Bang! Screams echoed in the auction house. The wheelchair hit the last step heavily. The recoil force directly shook Ling Li out and he fell on the hard stone. His clothes were torn and there were several bloodstains. There was a loud bang behind him. It turned out that the wheelchair hit the stone wall of the auction stage and a wheel fell off. Hiss! Ling Li moved his body and grimaced in pain. Wei Yuran was so cruel. If he knocked his head on the middle stage, he would definitely die because he was a waste. He tried to support his upper body to sit up, but his strength couldn't be more than half of that of a normal person. In addition, his lower body was sealed by himself. He couldn't get up no matter how hard he tried. After 2 attempts, Ling Li accepted his fate and lay on the ground motionlessly like a dead dog. Haha, hearing the laughter of Ma Jintian and Wei Yuran behind him, he sighed and thought, well. Wei Yuran, if you can get out of Yunjing City alive, I won't be the hierarch anymore. At this moment, Ling Li felt that the light in front of him dimmed. Someone stopped in front of him. He only saw a pair of feet. It was neither Ling Xian nor Ling Qinglan. He tried his best to raise his head to look, but found that he was suddenly being carried horizontally. Ling Li was stunned. Then he finally turned his head and saw a pair of cold black eyes. It was her. "Su Li, princess, let me do it," Yuni couldn't help but remind her. The young miss had a noble status, so how could she be intimate with such a profligate young master? Su Li shook her head and walked to the wheelchair with Ling Li in her arms. She gently put him down. Although one of the wheels of the wheelchair was broken and the soft cloth cushion on the chair was spilled out, it could still be sat. Ling Li sat down. Before he sorted out his thoughts, Su Li took out a close-fitting embroidered handkerchief and wiped the dirt and blood on his hands for him. Her movements were light and skillful. It seemed that she had repeated it thousands of times. Even Ling Xian couldn't compare with her. He had been pretending to be a playboy, but his face was tense. His deep eyes just stared at Su Li's drooping eyes. It seemed that something was alive in his heart. This time, he couldn't deceive himself anymore. The hatred of the country and the country were not as important as the person in front of him. He was already the lord of a big sect. He always meant what he said and killed decisively. Why did he become timid and worried about gains and losses when it came to Su Li? He killed the enemy and slept with the beauty. He wanted all of them. Su Li looked serious and focused. In the previous life, her disabled husband was quiet and gentle most of the time, but he was depressed and crazy more than once. He fell off the simple wooden chair and lay on the ground in embarrassment. Every time, she hugged her husband like this. Regardless of the reason, she wiped his wounds quietly. "Although I am not your wife in this life, at least, let me wipe your wounds again, Ling Li." Suddenly, a bewildered voice interrupted their thoughts. "Li. Princess Li." Su Li stopped her movements and raised her head. She looked a little cold. Seeing Wei Yuran approaching, she said calmly, "Second prince of Nanjiang country, this is not a gentleman's behavior. Even if the third child of the Ling family is ignorant and incompetent, you don't care about your life and bully others. It's too much." Wei Yuran was slightly stunned. He thought of Su Li's modesty and gentleness 2 days ago. She was not as strong and indifferent as she was today. However, he was taught a lesson by a woman. His good impression of Su Li faded away. He slightly lowered his eyebrows and eyes, and a kind of pressure came to Suli. You are just a princess. How dare you give orders to the prince of a neighboring country? Yun-Yi immediately stood in front of Suli and waved his hand to disperse the pressure. He looked at Wei Yuran, his sister and Ma Jintian coldly. In his eyes, there was only Suli. He didn't care whether they were princes or emperors. Seeing that Suli had a servant of the inborn realm, Wei Yuran's expression changed slightly. He restrained his breath and glanced at Ma Jintian. Then he left with his sister. At this moment, he understood that he was used by Ma Jintian. Ma Jintian smiled disapprovingly when he became enemies with Wei Yuran. What he did was an overt plot. Wei Yuran was willing to be tricked. He was scolded by Suli, but he still blamed Ma Jintian. He was really stingy. Suli just became a princess, but she couldn't wait to take the opportunity to show the power of the royal family. She was just a common girl. He used to think highly of this girl. It was really, thinking of this, Ma Jintian made a fist and palm salute perfunctorily. Then he left with a smile. It was 7:00 in the morning. He didn't want to stand here and be watched by others. Let's go. Suli took a deep breath and was about to leave with Yun-Yi. Ling Li suddenly woke up and was about to stop her. But at this time, Ling Xian ran to him in a panic. There were tears on her delicate face. Her eyes were full of worry and self-blame. She said, "Master, I'm late." Suli glanced at Ling Xian and then left without hesitation. Only Ling Li's eyes were still fixed on her back. Ling Xian quickly took out a handkerchief to wipe Ling Li's wound. But she saw that Ling Li held a fragrant handkerchief tightly in his hand. Her face was full of concern. Whose handkerchief was it? It was her. Ling Xian suddenly raised her head and saw Su Li's back turning around the stairs. A haze flashed through her watery eyes. Su Li, you really deserve to die. When she came to the VIP room on the 3rd floor, Su Li looked up at the nameplate of the Lord Rui's mansion. She narrowed her eyes and walked in. The auction house was the property of the Dongfang family. Dongfang Rui's room could only be described as luxurious. All the furniture and decorations were valuable. Under the whole transparent wall polished by colored glass, there were 2 benches paved with animal skin. Su Li sat on them and felt soft. The servants of the Lord Rui's mansion lined up behind her. As long as Su Li gave any order, they would immediately do it. All except Yun-Yi, go out. Su Li said faintly. Everyone immediately responded respectfully and left with light steps. Yun-Yi looked at Su Li's perfect side face. A trace of tenderness flashed through his drooping eyes. It was a good thing that the master trusted him and was close to him. There were melons and fruits offered by small countries on the table. Su Li picked them up and tasted them. Then she put them down again and picked up the auction list beside the fruit plate. She could see the auction order clearly. Su Li glanced at the bottom and saw the 4 words, full moon and heartstrings. She looked indifferent. Then she glanced at other auction items and gently put down the list. She thought for a while. Dongfang Rui was from the auction house, so he naturally couldn't participate in the auction. But Su Li, whose surname was Su, could take advantage of a loophole and come to the auction. Dongfang Rui had been dormant for years. He accumulated a huge amount of wealth by relying on the auction house and the restaurant industry. This time, he gave all of it to her for her to squander. However, even if the money could buy the full moon and heartstrings, she would never buy it. Today, whoever bought the full moon and heartstrings would be the target of public criticism. If she wanted this treasure, she had to consider whether her strength could withstand the storm. The Linley family was small and couldn't be exposed in front of others. The identity of the Lord Rui's mansion was sensitive. She couldn't rely on either of them. But even so, she still regarded the full moon and heartstrings as the treasure in her pocket. A divine light flashed in Su Li's eyes. The water in Yunjing City was just beginning to be muddy. She could still fish. In the VIP room of the Ling family, Ling Li wiped the blood on his arm with Ling Xian's handkerchief. Su Li's handkerchief had been put away by him. He was reluctant to wipe it. Ling Qinglan's face was gloomy. Ma Jintian and Wei Yuran dared to fight in the auction house. They were really audacious. How about the investigation of the forces of the Nanjiang country? Looking at the guests from all sides who came to the auction house one after another, Ling Li narrowed his eyes. Ling Xian nodded with a little worry. She hesitated for a while and said, "But if we fight, we will inevitably expose our forces to the royal family." "Master," Ling Li waved his hand to interrupt Ling Xian. He whispered with a smile, "How can I give the old thing Dongfang Shao a chance? I'd better learn from Mr. Li this time. The Lijua pill of the Lianshi cult is also annoying." Ling Qinglan's eyes flashed. He understood the meaning of Ling Li's words. He smiled and said, "I'll arrange it." Ling Li nodded slightly, but then shook his head and said, "It's not urgent. After the auction house, the most urgent thing is the full moon and heartstrings. Up until now, your life has been borrowed." Hearing that, Ling Qinglan sat down again. His eyes were calm. Ling Li was right. He had to settle the score with the Lianshi cult. The favor of Su Li and Mr. Li was more important. Even if everyone in the world coveted the full moon and heartstrings, he must try his best to get this treasure. Ling Xian, who stood beside them, slightly flashed her eyes and said softly, "We have already arranged people. No matter who finally wins the full moon and heartstrings, this treasure will fall into our hands through the auction house." Ling Qinglan shook his head and said, "Don't look down upon the people in the world. There are too many forces participating this time. Although the Hehuan sect and the Lianshi cult were fooled by Mr. Li before, they were still the 9th grade sects on the same level as the Yinma cult. If they looked down upon them, they would only suffer losses. Tell Ling Mo to be careful." Ling Li ordered with his eyes gloomy. As soon as he finished speaking, a heavy bell rang in the auction house. Dang dang dang. Chapter 223. After the bell rang, the ordinary seats were full. The ordinary warriors whispered to each other, and it was as noisy as a vegetable market. The ordinary seats didn't need any identity and only needed to pay 1,000 taels of silver as the admission fee. The entire auction house could accommodate tens of thousands of people to bid at the same time. Even if nothing was sold in this auction, they would make a lot of money. Suddenly, the whole hall was quiet. A well-combed old man in a splendid robe walked out from the back hall of the auction house. Many people's eyes flashed when they saw him. He was Eunuch Feng, a servant of Dongfang Shao. He presided over the auction house, which was enough to prove that the royal family attached great importance to this auction house. Eunuch Feng served Dongfang Shao all year round, so he was not nervous about a mere auction house. He walked to the high platform and cupped his hands to all directions. "Today, I preside over today's auction house as the steward of the Dongfang family. I hope that all the people in the martial arts circle will give me some face and don't make trouble at the auction house. Otherwise, it will be regarded as a provocation to the Dongfang family." As soon as he said that, many warriors with different ideas were slightly shocked. The royal family of the Dahan country was so domineering this time. Some people understood that Eunuch Feng meant that whatever happened after the auction house had nothing to do with the Dongfang family. As long as the people of the Dongfang family were not offended, they could do whatever they wanted. It's a bit interesting. In the inconspicuous VIP room on the second floor, the coquettish young man touched his blood-red lips with his fingertips and looked at the light black curtain wall diagonally opposite. His blood-red eyes flashed. Tao Zisang seemed to feel something and frowned to look downstairs. But he couldn't see the scene inside because of the glass curtain wall. There were many seniors hiding in the auction house. If he rashly released his psychic awareness, he would be stupid. Find out which force belongs to that VIP room. Tao Zisang gave the order. Immediately, someone left the VIP room silently. The 8 elders around him also looked tense. Although their cultivation was much higher than Tao Zisang's, they were led by him. Tao Zisang gave up his identity and lurked in the Dehan country for many years for the Lianshi cult. They were convinced by such a person. Ahem, as Eunuch Feng coughed slightly, the noise faded away. Many people focused on the high platform again. The auction officially begins. Before he finished his words, a manservant immediately put down a tray covered with a red cloth on the high platform. Eunuch Feng didn't talk nonsense. He lifted the white cloth with one hand and showed a long sword that emitted a faint cold air. The first one is the last sword forged by Master Shi 100 years ago, the Cold Wind Sword. The starting price is 100,000 taels of silver, and each increment must not be lower than 1,000 taels of silver. As soon as this item appeared, the hall on the first floor was in an uproar. What? This is Master Shi's last work. This item is extremely valuable. Even if it's useless, it's still worth 1,000,000 taels of silver. Shallow. Every weapon refined by Master Shi is a rare treasure. One look at this Hanfeng sword and you can tell that the body of the sword is made of 10,000-year-old cold iron, which is not inferior to the spiritual sword. It's more than 1,000,000. I bid 500,000 taels. 1,000,000 taels. 5,000,000 silver taels. 10 million. The price rose rapidly. Such a treasure at the beginning really aroused the enthusiasm of all ordinary warriors. Without the warm-up, the atmosphere of the auction was directly raised to the highest level. Not long after, the VIP rooms on the second floor also began to bid, but the third floor was quiet, without the slightest sound. Just the work of a dead master refiner was not enough to attract their attention. Of course, if Master Shi was still alive, the price of this work would be completely different. Bang! 30 million taels of silver, the third time. Congratulations to the guest number 22. The Cold Wind Sword is yours. Please wait for a moment. A supervisor of the auction house will go to complete the transaction with you alone. In the number 22 room, Tan Taiyu, who changed his appearance, sighed slightly. Qi Xianqing couldn't help but feel strange. Why do you buy this sword? There were many skilled craftsmen in Tianji country. Although this kind of sword was acceptable, it was only worth a base price of 100,000 taels in Tianji country. In his eyes, Tan Taiyu's behavior was undoubtedly a waste. Even if he had money, he couldn't spend it like this. Tan Taiyu said with a smile, "Last time I went to see junior sister apprentice, it was too abrupt. I have been thinking about what gift to give to junior sister apprentice. When I saw this sword, I remembered that junior sister apprentice seemed to lack a good weapon. The road to Tianji country is far away. I can't go back to Tianji country to save money, right?" "You brat," Qi Xianqing scolded with a smile, but he was gratified in his heart. Even if he was gone in the future, he believed that Tan Taiyu could protect Su Li and let her grow up to be the head of the Ghost Valley who could take charge independently. Su Li on the third floor didn't know that Qi Xianqing was with Tan Taiyu in the VIP room downstairs. At this moment, she closed her eyes to rest and waited for the arrival of the last moment like other forces. As an old industry, Yunjing Auction House was very sophisticated. The order of the auction items was very delicate. The cold wind sword was sold at a high price of 30 million taels of silver. After the atmosphere was heated up, the following auction items were not eye-catching, but they were also sold at a good price. The auction was very fast. In less than half a day, more than half of the hundreds of auction items were sold. The 55th auction item is a jar of Rollercoasters spirits of the Leanly building. The starting price is 5 million taels of silver. A manservant brought a small pot of wine and put it in front of eunuch Fong. The audience was surprised and doubtful. What kind of wine is the Rollercoasters spirits? What kind of wine can sell for 5 million taels of silver? Is the Yunjing auction house cheated? I have heard of the Leanly building. It is a restaurant opened by Mr. Lee. If it is true, the Rollercoasters spirits must be extraordinary. The crowd whispered. When someone heard this, his disdainful and doubtful expression immediately became surprised. Is Mr. Lee comparable to Qi Xianqing? It should be the wine brewed by him. The crowd burst into a loud discussion. When Qi Xianqing heard it, he couldn't help but feel strange. Mr. Lee. He had lived for more than 200 years, but he had never heard of such a person. Eunuch Fong pressed his hands with a smile and said, "Don't be impatient, everyone. Yunjing Auction House has always been honest in doing business. It is reasonable that the Rollercoasters spirits can be sold for 5 million taels of silver." After the appraiser of the auction house appraised it, we found that it is not only a rare wine in the world, but also has the effect of dispelling the cold poison. Speaking of this, Eunuch Fong paused and said, "However, the Rollercoasters spirits are not completely without drawbacks. The raw liquor is too strong and is not suitable for ordinary people. Only warriors whose cultivation reaches the inborn realm can bear the strength of the liquor. Otherwise, they are easily drunk." As soon as he said that, the warriors in the hall were all in an uproar. The cold poison was one of the strange poisons in the world. Chapter 224. After diluting a jar of the primal wine 100 times, it can be used by ordinary warriors to keep out the cold. After diluting it 10,000 times, even ordinary people can drink it. The starting price of this wine is 5 million. This auction house thinks that there is nothing wrong with it. Eunuch Fong smiled and said the last sentence. "I bid 6 million. The atmosphere froze for a moment, and immediately, someone began to bid wildly. The cold poison was not rare. It was very common for warriors living in the north. Every year, countless people died because of the cold air in the north. If the Leanly building opened in the north, it would definitely become the most popular restaurant in the north. 7 million. 8 million. 10 million. The price rose rapidly. Most of these people were martial artist merchants, and they could see ample profits from the fiery wine. If they could obtain this item and sell it to the north, they would definitely be able to make a fortune. In the end, the raw liquor of the Rollercoasters spirits was bought by a warrior businessman who often traveled to various countries at a high price of 15 million. The businessman who didn't get it was not discouraged and began to inquire about the location of the Leanly building. It was believed that after today, the reputation of the Rollercoasters spirits would be completely known. If Suli did things in the name of the Leanly building, it would be much more convenient. In the VIP room of the Ling family, Ling Li's eyes flickered when he saw the Rollercoasters wine. Did the Leanly building finally announce its existence to the world? As the sun gradually set, night fell, and the auction also came to an end. There were only a few items left, and the bidding became more and more intense. Almost all the people in the VIP rooms were bidding, and the cultivators in the main hall were short of money, so they could only watch the show. The next item is the second last item of this auction, a Qi Shan lotus. After shouting for a whole day, Eunuch Feng's voice was still sharp and loud. I don't need to say more about the effect of this thing. The starting price is 50 million taels of silver. Now, let the gold price begin. As soon as these words came out, all the martial artists in the hall went into an uproar. The noise almost overturned the roof of the auction house. Qishan Sky Lotus, there's actually such a thing. Is the Dongfang family stupid? Why would they auction this item? I bid 60 million. You want to obtain such a treasure with just 60 million? Are you trying to send a beggar away? I bid 80 million. My Luo Lei sect wants this item. 10 million gold taels. 10 million taels of gold was equivalent to 100 million taels of silver. When the rogue cultivators heard such a price, they were all horrified. They would never be able to earn so much money in their lifetime. Before the person in the VIP room finished speaking, a sneer came from the VIP room opposite the Luo Lei sect. What is the Luo Lei sect? I've never even heard of it. My Flying Star sect is willing to offer 20 million taels of gold. Don't be so arrogant. The Luo Lei sect offers 25 million gold taels. The people in the VIP rooms on the second floor were bidding crazily, causing all the martial artists in the hall to be dumbfounded. This was only the second last auction item, but the final price had already far exceeded their expectations. To be able to witness such a scene, it could be said that this trip was not in vain. The VIP rooms on the third floor and a few VIP rooms on the second floor were still quiet. They were not in a rush to bid. Su Li carefully looked at the jade-like pink lotus on the tray. It seemed that it had just been picked and was still delicate. She was very surprised. In the future, the value of this thing was no less than that of the full moon and heartstrings, or even more. Miss, Yuni couldn't help but remind her, this Qishan lotus has 24 petals. Each petal can make the acquired warrior break through the limit and realize the inborn realm. It is a rare treasure to cultivate the force at that time. Don't miss it. Recently, Miss sent them a lot of auxiliary medicine for practice. The practice of people in the Yunj sect progressed rapidly. They were all shocked by Su Li's medical skills, which could even assist the practice. Yun-Yi was quick-witted. He knew that Su Li wanted to cultivate the Yunj sect deeply. Naturally, he was very attentive. Su Li nodded with a smile flashing in her eyes. She didn't refute and said, "Then you bid and buy it." Yes. Yun-Yi was refreshed and immediately began to bid, 35 million gold taels. Lord Rui's mansion had been in charge of various forces for many years. They had plenty of gold. It was not a problem to buy the entire Yunjing city auction house. The VIP room on the third floor bids. That is Princess Li, isn't it against the rules? Someone questioned angrily. That is Lord Rui's daughter. Although she is called Princess, she has not entered the Dongfang family. Her surname is Su, and she doesn't violate the rules. I see. There was a lot of discussion in the crowd. Many forces who just came to Yunjing didn't know Su Li's identity. At this moment, they inquired a little and were disdainful. A little princess who had not entered the Dongfang family was not worth being afraid of. The VIP room number 21 bids 40 million gold taels. The VIP room number 11 bids 60 million gold taels. Many big forces were interested in the Qishan lotus. Yun-Yi's bid was soon overshadowed. This time, he didn't bid rashly, but calmly waited for the last moment. Su Li smiled slightly. If the Qishan lotus only had the effect that Yun-Yi said, she certainly wouldn't let Yun-Yi bid. After all, Ao's sword skills could also be used to break through the inborn hurdle. As long as one's comprehension was good enough, he could understand the first 3 levels of Ao's sword skills in less than 3 years, break through the bottleneck, consolidate the foundation, and master the terrible sword skills. It could be said to kill many birds with one stone. Compared with it, the Qishan lotus was much inferior. If it was more than 10 years later, the price of the Qishan lotus would not be so low. At least, it would be dozens of times more expensive, and there would be no market for it. If she remembered correctly, in another 2 years, a relic would appear in Nanjiang country. It was a mansion left by a mighty figure in the real spiritual circle, and it was a mighty figure in the medical circle. Countless extinct prescriptions would reappear, including the life-prolonging pill. The life pill here was not healing, but prolonging life. Every life pill could go against nature and prolong life by 50 years. At that time, the prescription was taken away by Yu Ming, the medicine emperor of the spiritual circle. In the previous life, after she succeeded in practicing and stepped into the martial arts circle, she was fortunate to follow a figure of the evil circle to the spiritual circle and witnessed the whole process of the medicine emperor refining the life pill. The relationship between Yao Huang and that person wasn't shallow, and he didn't hide anything from her, allowing her to secretly memorize the process of concocting the pill. Although she had never obtained the Mount Chi Sky Lotus in her past life and had never tried to concoct the life-continuing Dan, with her attainments in pill concoction, as long as she recalled the process, it wouldn't be a problem for her to concoct the life-continuing Dan. Su Li's eyes flashed slightly. Qi Xianqing was about to die. How could she not see it? She just didn't say it. She owed Qi Xianqing a lot of favors. The second half of the Ghost Valley meditation direction couldn't pay it off. Although she didn't know how Qi Xianqing could escape the limit of heaven and earth in the previous life, in this life, she would prolong Qi Xianqing's life. Just when Su Li was lost in deep thought, the price of the Qishan lotus had risen to 190 million taels of gold. Every time, there was a long interval before someone continued to raise the price. Yunyi hesitated and looked at Su Li. Su Li smiled slightly and pointed to the lotus on the tray. Get it at all costs. Yunyi's expression became firm. He turned his head and said, 200 million taels of gold. Wow! This was the first treasure in today's auction whose price exceeded 200 million taels of gold. How could it not be shocking? Princess Li is really bold. Let's quit. Someone said in a gloomy tone with bad intentions, I'm afraid that Princess Li has the money to buy the treasure, but she doesn't have the fortune to enjoy it. Someone took the lead, and immediately there was a burst of laughter in the field. Yun-Yi immediately looked worried. Miss, after the auction, there will be a chaotic battle. Why don't we leave in advance? No, I want to see who will get the last auction item. Su Li seemed to rely on the power of the Dongfang family. She was not afraid at all and refused without hesitation. Yun-Yi could only sigh. When the supervisor of the auction came to trade, he left quietly to arrange people. No matter who got the full moon and heartstrings, the whole auction would be in chaos. At that time, there would be countless people who would fish in troubled waters. The miss with the Qishan lotus was like a big red lantern in the dark. She would be the target of public criticism, just like the force who got the full moon and heartstrings. However, no matter how powerful the enemy was, he would try his best to protect the Mississippi. After a short commotion in the auction venue, as a young girl walked to the high platform with a tray covered with a red cloth, the whole venue was silent for a moment, and the tense atmosphere began to spread. Eunuch Feng smiled, as if he didn't notice that the atmosphere was getting tense. However, there were two cold-faced middle-aged men on both sides of him. The indifference in their eyes made the warriors in the field change their complexion slightly, and they couldn't breathe well. Some warriors with low cultivation couldn't help but spit out a mouthful of blood, and they looked terrified. Warriors at the peak of the inborn realm. And there were two of them at the same time. The royal family is really powerful. The arrogant and coquettish young man of the Hehuan sect also put away his contempt and admitted the overlord strength of the Dongfang family. The rest of the small sects who didn't know the immensity of the sky and the earth trembled with fear and reconsidered the previous threats. Anyway, Su Li had the blood of the Dongfang family in her body. If they hurt her, would it cause the anger of the Dongfang family? Many people thought of this, and the coldness in their eyes was restrained. Even the Dongfang family, who sent warriors to deter the forces in the martial arts circle, didn't expect that this move actually helped to relieve a lot of pressure on Su Li. The last auction item must have been waiting for a long time. I won't say much. Eunuch Feng lifted the red cloth neatly. There was a transparent glass bottle on the golden plate, in which an elixir with a cold color like moonlight lay quietly. The breathing in the hall immediately became heavier, and all the hot eyes were focused on the elixir. Ling Li held his breath slightly, but he didn't look at the full moon and heartstrings, but the young girl. He looked slightly gloomy and asked, "Is that one of us?" Ling Qinglan looked slightly pale and said, "No, it seems that the Dongfang family has found it." Ling Xian, who stood behind the two, looked down with her eyes gloomy. How could she let Su Li get what she wanted? This is the authentic full moon and heartstrings. Any female warrior, as long as she takes this elixir, the full moon immortal mansion will take root in the pubic region and be born by itself. Then she will become a rare talented warrior with unparalleled fighting power. Eunuch Feng's tone became excited and said, "This is a spiritual object of nature." Now, the bidding starts. The base price, none. Chapter 225. Silence. It was weird silence. After Eunuch Feng finished his words, there was no sound for a long time. The auction house fell into silence for the first time. Eunuch Feng was not in a hurry and still smiled. He knew that the silence would not last for a long time. The Lianshi cult bids 500 million taels of gold. His words were shocking. Many warriors sitting in the inquiring room were horrified. The people of the Lianshi cult were all cruel and merciless. They killed innocent people indiscriminately. In the territory of the Dehan country, they even reported their names to participate in the auction. Ha ha ha, Elder Tao, you are so bold. In this case, I can't hide it. 600 million taels of gold. A petrifying laughter resounded throughout the auction house, causing many martial artists to have goosebumps all over their bodies. This was not because of anything else, but because this laughter belonged to a man. Tao Zisang's face trembled and he was afraid. He said, "It turns out to be the deputy hierarch Hua of the Hehuan sect. Hierarchy has paid a lot for the full moon and heartstrings." Not at all, not at all. Elder Tao's wisdom is unparalleled. At that time, you must give in to this servant. The coquettish young man's voice was not sharp, but he pretended to be a weak woman's voice. Tao Zisang almost vomited. He could barely cope with it. At this time, Wei Yuran and Tan Taiyu couldn't help but bid one after another. The Wei family of Nanjiang country bids 700 million taels of gold. The Tantai family of Tianji country bids 800 million taels of gold. The voices came from the two VIP rooms almost at the same time. Then they looked at the VIP room where the voices came from. Wei Yuran looked indifferent and looked at Tan Taiyu's room coldly. In the secret competition with Dongfang Shao, he lost to Tan Taiyu and had been brooding about it. In addition to his sister's martial arts, no one in the Nanjiang country could surpass him in stratagem or anything else. Tan Taiyu must die. Suddenly, a surly and evil voice came from all directions in the auction house. The two warriors at the peak of the inborn realm standing on the edge of the high platform changed their expressions slightly and subconsciously approached Eunuch Feng. They couldn't tell where the voice came from. It's so lively. The Yinma cult can't be absent. Tao Zisang and the deputy hierarch Hua changed their expressions almost at the same time. The voice was, the hierarch of the Yinma cult, Childly. Childly. The cult leader of the devil cult is here. Is the hierarch of the devil cult actually a woman? Otherwise, why would she come to snatch the full moon and heartstrings? Nonsense. I heard that there is a saintess in the Yinma cult, so I need the full moon and heartstrings. It's terrifying. I can foresee a heaven-shaking battle. I'll leave immediately after the auction. If I get caught up in it, I won't even know how I died. Many martial artists were horrified. Some even had the intention to retreat and quietly left the scene. In the VIP room number 22, Tan Tai-yu and Qi Xianqing looked serious. I didn't expect that the small full moon and heartstrings could gather the three superpowers in the martial arts circle. Qi Xianqing sighed slightly, and his eyes became sharper. It seems that I have to do something. Tan Tai-yu grasped the tactical matrix in his hand tightly. The master knew that he couldn't do it, but he still did it. What was the special effect of the full moon and heartstrings on junior sister apprentice? Tao Zisang's heart was beating fast. He couldn't help but stand up and bow to the void from a distance. Hierarchically, you are a senior in cultivation. Why do you make life difficult for us juniors for the full moon and heartstrings? Yes. The coquettish young man said immediately. He actually echoed Tao Zisang's words and said nervously, hierarchically, you are distinguished. Today's auction is just a small scale. Why bother you to come here in person? The two elders spoke at the same time, and many martial artists were shocked on the spot. In their minds, the Yinma cult, the Hehuan sect and the Lianshi cult were at the same level. Why did the Yinma cult become the leader of the three superpowers? Tao Zisang's legs and stomach were trembling at the moment. The Yinma cult had always been secretive, but he was lucky to see Childly fight in person. He split the enemy in the inborn ninth hurdle into two halves with only one palm. It was really terrible. Although the coquettish young man didn't see Lingli fight, he was told by Yi Tian that if he came to Yunjing and met Childly, he must not be his enemy. Otherwise, he would lose his life in vain. Hierarchically was such a proud person, but he showed fear in front of Childly, which impressed him deeply. The slightly hoarse laughter echoed again. Childly continued to say, you don't need to be so restrained. I don't care about the full moon and heartstrings. However, the Dahan country is my territory. Since you are here, how can I not do my best as a host? Tao Zisang and Tao Zisang were relieved when they heard Childly's words. But the latter words made them feel nervous at the same time. They felt cold all over. At this moment, the middle-aged man in black who was sitting quietly on the top floor of the back hall of the auction house suddenly opened his eyes with a strange expression. It's strange that I can't find the trace of Childly with my unique psychic awareness. It seems that this person is really a strong enemy, as the head said. Hearing that Childly said that the Dahan country was his territory, the middle-aged man in black looked gloomy. Childly obviously didn't care about the Dongfang family. It was outrageous. Even I can't find the trace of him. It seems that even if the devil is not in the longevity realm, he is not an ordinary person at the peak of the inborn realm. If I report it to the head, I will gain something. The middle-aged man's murmur gradually became lower. His task was not only the Yinma cult. Since he couldn't find the trace of Childly, he would make more efforts on other forces. His eyes flashed. The Hehuan sect and the Lianshi cult dare to covet the territory of the Dongfang family. They don't know what is good for them. The bidding in the hall was still going on. Except for the Hehuan sect, the Lianshi cult and the princes of the two countries who dared to bid, the other forces were also trembling with fear and didn't dare to bid. Now the full moon and heartstrings in Eunuch Fang's hand was a hot potato. They didn't want to lose their lives in the Dahan country without knowing the reason. 5 billion taels of gold. Tan Tai Yut said a shocking number with no expression. It was the income that many small countries couldn't get for 10 years. Wei Yuran sneered and said, "It's boring to continue bidding with gold. The full moon and heartstrings can't be measured by money. Why don't we use the rules of the martial arts circle to decide the bidding price?" Tao Zisang's eyes flashed and he said with a smile, "Child Wei's words are very reasonable. The Lianxia cult offers 10 martial arts stones and 50 middle-grade elixirs. If there is a higher price, the Lianxia cult will withdraw from this competition." As soon as the words came out, Wei Yuran's face immediately became gloomy. He was not the only one who was prepared. Compared with the Lianxia cult, which had a profound foundation, the 3 martial arts stones he collected seemed to be too inferior. "Brother," Wei Zhenjin was worried. It seemed that she couldn't get the full moon and heartstrings immediately. "You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure."